Welcome to the sleep haunt. Tonight, the open highway stretches into endless dark, carrying 8 true disturbing trucker horror stories, tales from quiet rest stops, forgotten motels, and long empty roads where the silence feels alive. These stories don't rush. They move slow and steady, whispering through the night until the last light fades. Stay with me until the final mile, where each story connects to the next, and the last echo fades into stillness. If you're new, subscribe to our channel so you never miss what waits beyond the road. Share your city and the time you're listening in the comments. I love seeing how far these stories travel. And like our video. Your like motivates us to keep bringing you more nights on the road. Story number 1. He was running west through a stretch of desert that looked like it had been poured out of a kiln. Heat still held lightly to the ground even at 2 a.m., lifting in pale ripples from the shoulder, as if the road itself was exhaling. His name was Eli, the kind of driver who treated every mile with the same measured patience, who kept his truck tidy and his coffee lukewarm, who watched the sky as though it could tell him something about the asphalt below. His route, on paper, was simple: cut across the empty basin, take the bypass, stop at the next town for fuel, and a sandwich wrapped in wax paper. In practice, the night always stretched things. Time felt like a soft cord, lengthening with every reflector post that slipped by his peripheral vision. The moon was a silver coin lodged behind thin clouds, and his headlights dusted the road with a quiet, unfussy light. A warm breeze pressed gently against the cab whenever he cracked the window to keep the air moving. The CB was on low, a background whisper. Now and then a faint voice came through, someone discussing a storm hours away, someone else noting a deer near mile marker 318. Mostly it was just the sound of distance. Way station 2 miles, said a blue sign that reflected so cleanly it might have been polished that day. It surprised him. His GPS, faithful and modest, showed nothing until the bypass. But the sign was official. Crisp. The lettering even. The arrows perfect. He had no reason to doubt paint and aluminum. Another sign followed, quietly insistent. We station, next right. He checked his mirrors. Empty. The desert had the kind of silence that made his own engine seem polite. He adjusted his grip on the wheel, more about the habit than necessity, and eased into the right lane. The ramp popped into view as if it had been tucked carefully behind a bend. The entrance lit by tidy overhead lamps that hummed invisibly. Beyond, a low building sat like a bleached shell, windows square and bright, flag hanging still, the colors a little too vivid under fluorescent light. It was comforting at first, the orderliness of it. After miles of unspooling dark, here was a place with lines and purpose. He rolled onto the ramp and let the posted speed guide him. A green digital sign flicked from rest off to open. He waited for a voice on the speaker, but none came. The radio cut to a clean static that didn't rise or fall, like a machine deciding how to breathe. The scale platform glimmered with a matte sheen, free of dust. A rarity out here. He aimed his front axle onto the pad and felt the slightest thrum as the surface recognized him. Numbers flashed almost too quickly to register, settled, then stilled. The sign above the window traced opaque words with dot matrix resolve. Pull forward. He did, gentle on the throttle. The truck gliding like a long animal in a river. He stopped when the front glass framed the service window. A silhouette sat inside, motionless, as if the person had been paused in the middle of a shift. He lifted a hand out of courtesy. No wave returned. The intercom remained prim. It was the weight reading that teased his attention. The exact numbers from his last way out, down to the single digit he had been pleased about, the margin that told him he'd balanced the load perfectly. Not a ballpark. Exact. He leaned closer to the dash instinctively, as if looking would change something. The numbers stared back, unapologetically precise. He touched the knob of the CB without any plan of speaking. As if called, a voice drifted in, grainy, close, as though it were coming not from a distance, but from a small room with high ceilings. "Don't stop here, Hummingbird," the voice said, using his handle, one he'd picked a long time ago when an older driver said his rig sounded like a giant metal bird gliding. "Keep rolling. You'll see why." Eli didn't answer. His hand hovered, then lowered. It didn't make sense to answer a stranger who knew him. He had never broadcast his handle in hours, and not here. He looked at the silhouette again. Still a shape, still a suggestion of a person, frozen in a posture that almost matched his own. He shrugged the thought away. Drivers ran into each other on the radio in strange ways sometimes. The green sign flicked again, its letters rearranging themselves with the staccato patience of old tech. Please proceed. Another sign he hadn't noticed at the entrance blinked for the first time. A plain instruction in white on black. Lights on. His lights had been on. Dust sifted slowly across the beam like snow in a snow globe, then faded, as if embarrassed to be seen. He rolled forward, crossed the pad, and looked for the exit arrow. There were several, all pointing to each other. The ramp split and braided back on itself in gentle curves, careful lanes with unbroken paint. He chose one, the lane on his right that seemed truest, and the tires hummed over a series of seams exactly like the ones he'd just passed. He checked the mirror, expecting to see the low building shrinking in the distance, but it remained somehow in front of him, the same angle, the same square of window light. He blinked. Maybe the lane circled the office for a security scan. That happened sometimes, in more populated states. He followed the line. It happened again. The ramp unwound, then folded back gently, the same invitation in a different loop. He passed a patch of asphalt near the shoulder, where the tar had healed a crack with a dark, feathered line, a shape he recognized now because of the way it looked like a bird's wing. He told himself he had simply noticed it earlier. He checked the clock. 2:13 a.m. The clock had not moved, not even a minute. He looked away, feeling a flush of warmth that wasn't quite fear and wasn't quite heat. He looked back. 2:13 a.m. The CB was ready, patient. The same voice came softly as if leaning close to a door. You're going to see that feathered line again. Go. Middle lane when it splits, not right. Don't look in the window. There was a window to his left, the square of light out of which nothing had moved. He hadn't truly looked into it, not deliberately. He kept his eyes on the road and the little world immediately ahead of his bumper. The ramp forked right, left, middle, though he was certain it had been 2 lanes a moment ago. He went for the center, as the voice suggested, because staying with a suggestion felt easier than inventing his own plan. Gentle turn, gentle breath. The tires found the shallow groove of the lane like a rail. The building slid past his peripheral vision again, as if someone had dragged a cardboard model on a tabletop. His chest tightened, not with panic but with the same sensation a person feels when they realize they have left their keys somewhere they just were. His hands remained steady, because his hands always remained steady. He glanced, just a sliver of an eye, at the service window without meaning to. Inside, behind the glass, a figure sat under a softly buzzing light. The posture was his posture. The shoulders slightly forward, the arm angle resting on a counter at a height his own elbow would favor. The face was not a face. It was a suggestion, a contour seen through reflections of the fluorescent tubes. But the outline mapped onto his own, like a shadow pinned to a wall. He snapped his gaze back to the road, something cold and very polite passing through his arms and settling in his wrists. An overhead speaker clicked with the faintest mouth sound of a mic opening. Then nothing. The green sign, unwavering, reset again. Please proceed. Welcome home. He heard it without hearing it. He did not stop. The feathered crack in the tar returned, passing under his tires with a low bumble of texture he could feel through the wheel. Time remained fixed, unblinking. He set the cruise for a slower roll, not because of control, but to change the rhythm. Outside the lanes, the desert stayed still, a parchment-colored sea holding its breath. The flag on the low pole had not moved. A moth flitted within his lights, then did not reappear, as if his beams had folded it away. Mile marker 343, the voice said calmly. Count it 3 times. Don't answer me. Don't agree. You'll want to, but don't. If you say anything, you'll have to repeat it. Let the tires say yes for you. It was an odd comfort to have instructions, even from nowhere. He took a breath and held it for a count, then let it go. The ramp widened. The lanes braided again, and gave him an option that felt new. A break in the white that allowed him to angle, not toward the office, or away from it, but parallel to it. sliding along a boundary he would not have recognized without the prompt. The night felt thinner there, like a curtain tugged gently to one side. The exit ramp finally kissed the highway. He could see the main lanes beyond, dark and honest. The sign that marked the reunion of roadways blinked a sleepy arrow. He eased back onto the interstate like a swimmer returning to lane after drifting toward the deep end. The mile marker showed its green face with a generous font. 343. He noted it, not forcing relief because relief had proved unreliable here. He drove on. The next marker rose up from the shoulder grass, caringly painted. 343. He did not look at the clock. He did not speak. The third one came with the same unassuming presence. 343. He felt a subtle click in the machinery of the night, as if a gear had finally found its partner and turned once. The CB hissed, then was quiet. He left it on, left it low. The building, if he looked back now, would have been a difficult thing to explain to himself. So he didn't. He kept the road in front of him a stream of manageable decisions. The desert gave him the gift of a distant town's glow, a soft bruise of light on the horizon. His clock ticked. 2:14 a.m. It was a small thing, but it felt like a window opening in a house he had thought was sealed. He took the next exit, not because he needed to, but because the truck liked it when he checked in with his instincts. The fuel station was mostly asleep. A single car idled with a quiet patience, and a cat moved between shadow and shadow, owning the lot with no paperwork. Inside, he bought coffee and a pastry that had seen better mornings. The person behind the counter nodded at him, then frowned. "You get in okay?" they asked. It was small talk with an odd angle. He said yes, because he had. The person watched him for a heartbeat longer than polite, then looked away. Maybe it was just the hour. Maybe he looked tired. He returned to the cab, placed the coffee in the cup holder, and watched condensation bead at the lid's rim. The highway called him back with its simple repetition. The sun did not rise so much as think about it. The sky slowly took on the color of something rinsed clean. He kept moving. Near dawn, when the light reveals the kinds of details that only exist at dawn dust hanging like thought, grass bent by the memory of wind, he passed a patch of old road that diverged and returned in a broken loop. It was fenced off, marked with a sign that had given up its letters to weather. Behind it lay the remnants of a building, a low smithereen of cinder block and twisted pipe. A flagpole leaned slightly in a way that flags do not forgive. It was, unmistakably, a way station, and it had not been functional for a very long time. He slowed, not to stop, only to let the eyes do their work. The office window had no glass. Its square was a square of daylight, clean, pure, forgiving. He could see through it to the other side of the world. Something in the posture of the ruin suggested care. Whoever had left it had not bothered to take the presents with them. The building had let itself become a shape in the landscape and seemed content with it. A sign hung askew from its bolts near the entrance. It refused to die, held on by the stubbornness of old metal. Dust control in effect, it said, which amused him mildly, because there was no controlling dust here, not in sunlight, not in hindsight, not in history. As the truck rolled by, the CB whispered again, a little warmer this time, as if it had found the right setting. "You used the middle lane." "Good. That was the only way out last time." Last time. He almost laughed, a kind sound that didn't quite make it to his throat. He didn't answer. He had learned not to. The day cleared fully, and the night's questions packed themselves into tidy boxes that would take time to open again. Still, the detail lodged. The exact weight reading, the fixed clock, the welcoming sign that had called him home to a place that had been empty for years. He reached the town, fueled, ate the wax paper sandwich, and found it better than expected. The way food can be after a strangeness turns your senses up a notch. He spoke to another driver who had the kind of careful eyes that take in the small things. The other driver mentioned a loop near the desert way station that had been closed since a fire long ago. Most of it quick, no one hurt. Just the building deciding it was time to stop being a building. Some said the equipment still flickered on when the humidity was right. Most said nothing. The road let some topics sit undisturbed. That night, before sleep, He cleaned the dust off the dashboard with a small cloth. He liked the ritual. It gave structure to the end of a day. On the radio shelf, tucked under the CB, he kept a paper map. He unfolded it and traced his finger along the route, like a person checking an old path through the woods. Nothing showed where the signs had appeared. He folded the paper neatly and stowed it again. On the next run through that part of the state, he stayed in the center lane when the lanes divided for any reason whatsoever. He did it with a light touch that didn't signal superstition or fear, just rhythm. He kept his eyes ahead when maintenance vehicles flashed their warning lights on the shoulder and tried not to steal glances into lit windows that promised paperwork and routine. He passed mile marker 343 at midday and felt a small knot inside him unfasten, even though it had not been truly tied. The CB kept quiet for long stretches, then surprised him once near dusk with a low, almost smiling sound. "Keep the middle," the voice advised gently, a suggestion without pressure, a note in a song he could hum but not place. He nodded. And though no one could see a nod alone, that yes carried through the steering wheel into the road and out along the painted lines. Later, when others asked him if he believed in things the road held on to, in places that didn't know how to stop doing what they were built to do, he said that the highway was like water. It remembered. It would show you sweet reflections if you looked kindly at it. It would show you the bottom if you leaned too far. And somewhere west of a desert town where a cat owned the gas station, and where the dawn was so gentle it made the world feel newly washed, there was a place with a square window that had once been very bright. On certain warm nights, when the wind was still and a driver's hands were steady, it might try to weigh more than axle loads. It might try to weigh time. Story number 2. She liked the mountain runs best when the world had put itself to bed. The route over Tailwind Pass was a spine of highway that slid between firs and cliffs, a ribbon stitched with cat's eye reflectors, and the occasional eyelid blink of a deer far off in the trees. Mara took it at night whenever dispatch allowed. The air felt honest then. The road gave her back the sound she put into it, and that exchange, steady and clear, was the kind of company she preferred. Her rig hummed with a familiar confidence. The load was well-balanced medical freezers on pallets, strapped and checked 3 times, the kind of cargo that liked a smooth ride and a calm hand. On the dash, a sticky note reminded her of the chain law dates, though the season for iron was long past. Midsummer washed the shoulders in tall grass, the kind that glowed pale in headlights, and moved like thought when breezes found it. The forecast had promised a straight, quiet night. A few stars lived between high clouds, and the road wore last week's tire dust like a light scarf. She left the county yard with the windows cracked to keep the cabin cool. The scent of fir sap and old rain lived in the air, the cleanest kind of smell. In the mirror, the trailer's white flank carried her name in small letters that never clamored for attention. She reached the base of the climb earlier than expected. Mile marker 54 slipped past. A green sign announced, "Tailwind Pass Summit 27 miles," understated as always. She thumbed the CB to a low murmur on 19 out of habit, more for the idea of a conversation than the thing itself. The interstate tapered to 4 lanes, then 2 as it shed the valley's traffic and took on the quiet of the hills. It started with a portable message board. Amber bulbs spelled words that shouldn't have been there. "Pilot car in operation," it said. "Prepare to follow." She frowned, without fully deciding to. The weekly bulletin out of the state office had noted night work in spring, but not now. Her GPS showed open lanes and a green line, the digital kind of confidence that usually matched what her eyes found. But the board blinked again, methodical and certain. "Pilot car, next 30 miles. She eased back on the throttle, not a brake tap, just a small lift that acknowledged surprise. The next board echoed the first, like a friend repeating a joke to be sure it landed. "Pilot car maintain 47 miles per hour. The number was particular enough to feel real. 47, not 45, not 50. It made her think of a person behind the instruction, rather than a generic template someone forgot to adjust. At the merge where the first ramp peeled off toward an old maintenance lot, a white pickup slid out like a thought-gathering shape. Amber strobes glowed on its cab roof. Not urgent, just polite. A flip-down sign on the tailgate glimmered under the beams. "Follow me." The letters wavered, as if written by a small current of air. No logos on the doors. No dot number. Just a tidy vehicle that looked calcified with dust in a way that happens to trucks that live in gravel lots. She supposed it could be county. Loans of equipment happen. She stayed in lane and let the pickup set the pace. It settled at 47, as if the number were a song stuck in its head. The gap between them measured itself without her having to, a clean, respectful distance that never fussed. The highway climbed, leaning into the mountain's shoulder. A creek ran somewhere to the right where she couldn't quite see it. The sound came up through the floorboards in a soft rush, a long exhale against stone. Reflectors along the guardrail winked off and on in a rhythm the brain wants to make into a pattern. Her touch held steady, a needle that knew when to stay where it belonged. The CB ticked once, the sound of a mic depressed and released without speaking. She waited, then returned to the simple act of following the amber glow. The white pickup never touched its brake lights on the grades. It chose its speeds like a person who had practiced this exact drive 1,000 times and liked it best with the radio off. Mile marker 57 carried a small extra tab she had never seen. 57 amperes. A temporary measure, maybe, when a section gets realigned. She made a note to mention it to Jan at dispatch, the one who collected such details and stored them like baseball cards. The next marker also wore an A. It wasn't impossible. Roadwork can stretch a mile out or fold it back on a map, and only the asphalt knows the truth. She drove on. Under the first snow, shed a concrete tunnel built to teach avalanches to pass over, rather than through. The sound changed. Tires sang, a low chord that lived in the ribs of the tunnel, a resonance of air that had learned to sit still. The pickup's Follow Me panel flickered for a breath, and then steadied, like a throat clearing. Light puddled and receded around them. On the walls, old paint marks lingered, arrows from long ago work, faint measurements. She caught a name among the chalk ghosts. Ray. A date followed it years back, winter months that came with a particular kind of memory. She told herself that workers wrote names everywhere. It was how a job said hello to itself. Outside the shed, the world smelled briefly of cold, as if the concrete had stored winter and was happy to share, even now. She watched for animals out of habit. An elk can step out at the oddest times, a silent, careful thing that wears the road like a thought before deciding to cross. Tonight, the forest held whatever it was thinking. Another message board waited past an old turnout for a runaway ramp, the kind of place you never want to use but are grateful to see. The board offered a new line. Maintain 2 reflectors' distance. It would have sounded poetic if it wasn't so precise. There were 2 reflectors on the tail of the white pickup, square as cookies, bright as clean teeth when her lights hit them. She held the gap exactly, not by counting, but by feel. Her right hand stayed light on the wheel, her left hovered near but not on the brake. The world approved. Something about the night inside the pass felt curated. No opposing headlights, not for a long stretch. No glare on the windshield from far-off houses. The sky, where it broke through the firs, seemed lower and friendlier. The mountain wanted quiet, and, out of respect, vehicles had offered it. Her phone showed bars, then not. Her dash clock moved, faithful 1-minute jumps. The GPS tried to recenter at curves, then gave up the urge. The white pickup never deviated. In the mirror, for the length of a breath, she saw another set of headlights far back, neither gaining nor falling. The distance stayed the same no matter how long she kept it in view, as if it wasn't truly there, but an echo drawn on the road by her own presence. A hairline stream crossed under one span, and picked up the light like a wire. The pickup slowed 2 miles per hour without brake lights, and brought her speed with it. In the old radio on the shelf above, a faint voice visited. It had the tone of a person saying practical things while looking out a window. 47 holds the slope, it said. 47 keeps the mountain guessing. It was close by and far away at once. She didn't reach for the mic. She didn't do anything. Sometimes the best way to keep something gentle is not to press. They entered a cut where rock faces leaned in, stacked layers of geology like pages in a book that had been left open too long. Orange netting hung across one seam where frost sometimes pried, and the mountain asked for patience. The pickup sign adjusted itself again. Do not stop. Common sense, she told herself. But the instruction coasted onto her like a quiet hand on a shoulder. Do not stop. Not for a strange sound. Not for a shadow. Not for curiosity. Keep the story moving. The grade eased at a wide saddle before the final lift to the summit. There, a temporary sign, heavy plastic bolted to posts that still wore the mud of spring, leaned a little in the wind. "Thank you, pilot cars," it read in thick letters. The thank you carried sincerity. She had seen similar signs after construction, borrowed boards that took a while to collect. This one, though, felt older than the plastic. It felt like gratitude that had settled in, taken off its coat, and stayed for a while. She had heard of a pilot car named Ray when she started in the region. Older drivers spoke about him the way you talk about a particular bend in the road. He'd run nights a few winters back when a slide had complicated the pass. People said he'd paced trucks through when the snow was soft, and the mountains were listening extra carefully. He kept it at 47, always 47. It had become a quiet joke. Ray's number. She'd never met him. Retirement was the last anybody had mentioned. A clean exit from a job that treats clean exits like rare birds. The summit arrived the way familiar summits do, without drama. The crest sign was small, guilty of understatement. Elevation: 3,817. She glanced at the outside thermometer, out of habit. The needle had dipped a single degree between the base and here, then stepped back up for reasons known only to air. The white pickup, still leading with a calm that could have been mistaken for boredom, signaled left toward the descent as if it were checking on her rather than instructing. It was a gesture that felt human. On the other side, the valley stretched warm and dark, a bowl that held the faint orange of a town an hour away. The first 100 feet of slope were always the place to make a decision. She feathered the Jake lightly in low setting, no need to sing too loudly at night, and followed the pilot car's line. 47 held without complaint. She had thought it would feel slow. It felt like the speed of a story told well. Her dash clock ticked a minute with small ceremony. 2:41 a.m. Then 2:42. In the mirror, the echo light appeared again. The same distance as before. The same patient presence that didn't ask to be counted. She noticed, without wanting to, that when she put on her blinker for a curve, there was a faint reflection in the distance that answered her rhythm half a beat later. Not a vehicle. Then, not really. A call and response that belonged to the road itself. Halfway down, they rolled past a turnout where yellow machines slept graders with their metal smiles, backhoes shaped like big cats at rest. A chain hung across the entrance, loose enough that a nimble person could duck under it, but tight enough to tell the world it should wait. In the yard, a chalkboard leaned against the wall of a metal building. The light was poor, and her job was not to read, but the board was an insisting black square. A list of plate numbers sat on it, chalk lines uneven where the hand had held its breath. Her own plate lived there among them, neat, legible, chalk still crisp around the edges, as if added not long ago. She didn't jam the brakes. She didn't crane. She let the moment drift away like breath on glass. Someone humming, somewhere, had written her down. The CB popped to life with a sound like a thought deciding to become a word. "Gate 3 is clear," a voice said. "Wind over viaduct is steady at nothing." The choice of phrase made her smile. Steady at nothing. It was the kind of forecast a person can trust. The white pickup rolled onto the long bridge where crosswinds like to play in colder months. Tonight the air didn't touch the rig at all. The water below was moth-dark and glossy. Lights from far creek-keeping stations pricked the surface like thoughtful pins. The pickup slowed briefly to 32, exactly 32. Then it drifted back to 47. It felt like a bow to an old habit, a nod to a place where more attention had been needed once. On the far shore, where the guardrail curved and the trees leaned in to say they had seen much and were not surprised by anything anymore, another temporary sign rose to meet them. "Last trip of the night," it read, then flickered, then reset to "follow me," as if the board couldn't quite give up its favorite phrase. The final miles tipped gently to a valley that held orchards and a sugar plant that smelled sweet when the wind was right, and like nothing when the wind was lazy. The white pickup showed its turn signal toward a modest access road that could have been a construction entrance in another season. The gate at the end stood with its arms open, then closed, then open again in the time it took to blink. The pickup slid inside. In the glow from her headlights, she caught a glimpse of a faded logo on the door, so faint and tired, it might have been a trick of light. County roads. A number under it had been rubbed to a gray memory. The amber strobes dimmed. The flip-down sign clicked back up, and the tailgate was just a tailgate again. She passed on, the yard falling back into the kind of darkness that doesn't hold grudges. The road returned to its plain, trustworthy self. Opposing headlights came like distant ships. A single car passed with a nod of white and red, the driver steady. The world resumed. Her phone held a signal that behaved. The GPS traced the rest of the route as if it had intended to all along. She let her shoulders remember a looser posture. In the valley, a late-night bakery lit like a lantern offered a coffee window for drivers. She eased off, parked with the satisfaction that comes from precise lines, and climbed down to stretch. Gravel paled under the lot lights. The smell of yeast and sugar and warmth wrapped around her like a blanket someone loaned and never asked back. The person at the window had the calm eyes of someone who had seen a lot of faces at hours people aren't built for but insist on. They poured black coffee and passed it to her with a polite nod. "How's the pass?" they asked, more out of ritual than newsworthiness. "Open," Mara said. The word felt accurate, and also insufficient. "Pilot car," she added, like a small artifact she wasn't sure what to do with. The person paused, then smiled the kind of smile that includes memory. "Haven't heard that in a while," they said. They used to run those nights after the big slide. Old Ray set the speed. 47. He said the mountain liked a rhythm. "Haven't seen the boards since last year. State finally cleared it, least what they say." "Ray," she repeated, not like a proper noun but like a chord the bakery had taught her. She thought of the chalk on the snow shed's wall. She thought of the number on the temporary sign. "He's still around?" "Not working," the person said, gentle. "Heard he passed on in winter. Quiet as you like." Family had a thing at the yard. People wrote his speed in chalk on the boards. Looked like a line of little truths. They tapped the counter with 2 fingers, as if completing a count without counting. "You do this run a lot?" "Often enough," she said, accepting a pastry she hadn't planned on but that had appeared on the counter anyway. "I like nights." "Me too," they said, and it sounded like a secret they were willing to share. They glanced past her shoulder toward the truck, then back. "Keep 47 through there if it's all the same to you, can't hurt." She lifted the coffee in a small salute. Wasn't planning on changing anything. Back in the cab, she sat with the wheel in her hands for a breath before rolling. The cab held a particular quiet, the kind you find after a song stops, but the air carries the shape of it for a while. She looked at the clock, not because she had to, but because small confirmations like to be collected. 3:07 a.m. She calculated arrival in her head the way drivers do, adding and subtracting without pen and paper, letting experience do the arithmetic. It came out fine. The rest of the night behaved like a page that turned cleanly. Town lights grew. Signs remembered their sentences. The engine sang its work song soft. When she parked at the receiver just before dawn, a pale wash settled in the east, the color of a promised letter. She checked the straps out of habit, even though the cargo had not moved. The world felt in order in the way that doesn't call attention to itself. Sleep was calm. It met her like someone who had been waiting in a chair nearby, reading, content to be quiet until she was ready. When she woke, sunlight painted the dash, picking out dust she hadn't noticed. She brushed it away with the back of her hand and felt, in the simplest way, grateful for lines on roads and for people who decide on specific numbers and stand by them. She ran Tailwind Pass again 2 nights later. No message boards announced anything except weather that didn't mind being outside. No pilot car slid out to lead the dance. The snow shed breathed its cool breath and let them pass. She held 47 on the grades anyway without looking at the speedometer too much. Habit and a suggestion can be the same thing when they're kind. At the descent, the wind stepped out to look over the viaduct and then back. It was soft and reasonable. The chalk on the snow shed wall had blurred from a week of damp air and fingerprints. But the name Ray still lived there, an old friend who didn't need to be loud. On clear evenings, when the sky decided to let stars stud the black instead of hiding them, she sometimes saw a pickup parked in the maintenance yard, or perhaps she wanted to. It was always a light shape among darker shapes, a suggestion of white among grays. No strobes, no signs. Just the comfortable weight of something that had done its job well and had not forgotten the shape of it. Word traveled as it does along the chain of drivers, from fuel stop counter to CB, From a glance across a diner to a sentence traded without effort. Keep 47 through the pass, someone would say, almost like advice about an old girlfriend or a pothole that only appears in rain. The number made the rounds. Nobody argued. Some even smiled when they said it, the smile of a person who has learned to be polite to mountains because mountains have memories longer than the rest of us. Once, a month later, when the first leaves pretended to consider turning, she came upon a new portable board stored at the edge of a lot below the summit. The panel was dark. The letters on its casing were crisp, fresh paint, state-issued, and tidy. Someone had tucked a small sticker under the control box, the kind of sticker maintenance people put on things when nobody is looking. 2 numbers sat on it in black marker. 4, 7. That was all. The ink had bled a little in the Sunday. She drove by at exactly that, not for luck, not for superstition, but because sometimes a number feels like the right key for a lock you can't see and don't need to. It wasn't a miracle. It didn't need to be. It was a stretch of road that had been taught to accept quiet, a mountain that preferred certain footsteps, a community of hands that had built, rebuilt, and then stood back with the kind of pride that doesn't call its own name. A truck, a driver, a night. All of it simple. All of it enough. On her dashboard shelf, paper maps lay under a rubber strap in case of dead batteries and stubborn apps. One afternoon she traced the pass with a finger, while remembering the way the white pickup had moved, the way the sign had flicked. Follow me. She thought about how many times in life someone says that and means well. She thought about how many times a person follows the right thing because the speed makes sense. She closed the map, set it back under the strap, and went to work. When fog hunkered low in the shoulder hollows later in the season, the road sometimes narrowed to a world that existed 3 stripes ahead of the bumper. Birds wrote their own language in the air above the crest. Unreadable but pretty. The creek wore a cooler voice. Drivers disappearing into that pale world would call to one another in humble ways. Come on, someone would say. Hold 47. And they did, and the mountain let them pass, unbothered, approving. If anybody had asked Mara to prove it, to produce a record, she would have shrugged. The dash cam had captured nothing strange, just a vehicle, lawful speed, a clean run. The chalkboard with her plate number probably read different now. Chalk is like that. It prefers to forget when asked. But when the tires touched the joint seams under the snow shed and the low cord lifted around her, she heard a human thing in it, the faint suggestion of a voice that had guided enough trucks to know exactly how long to pause between instructions. It said nothing more than a speed and a sentiment that hid inside a simple phrase, "Follow me." She did. When the pass asked for quiet, she kept the quiet. When the number asked for respect, she gave it. There are places on any map where the road still remembers every tire. There are people behind the paint and the signs who listen closely to rock. Sometimes, if a driver is out late and the world is kind and the mountain has rested enough, those 2 kinds of memory meet in the middle and travel together, amber lights dimming at the exact moment the valley takes the wheel. Story number 3. Caden favored the long flats where the horizon ran straight and honest, a seam stitched cleanly between earth and sky. The prairie at night had its own sound, a low, steady hush in the tall grass, a slow wind that spoke in syllables, and the faint hiss of tires wearing their narrow path into the world. He liked the way the stars drew long, steady lines when Cloud wasn't in the mood, and how distant farm lights sat on the land like notes pinned to sheet music. He hauled tempered glass west this week, pallets wrapped tight and strapped so carefully that nothing so much as breathed. The pieces would become storefronts somewhere, panes that would reflect people walking by with coffee and sunlight behind them. The thought was nice. Work that turned into windows felt like good work. It was late enough that most of the small-town stoplights had flipped to blinking yellow, late enough that farmhouse televisions had clicked off in little squares of blue and then darkness. His coffee sat in its thermos with a straw, lukewarm by choice. He didn't like hot things when he needed steady hands. The dash glow painted the cab in soft colors. His GPS traced a green line along the interstate like a ribbon that knew what it was doing. He crossed into a stretch where the lanes ran ruler straight between barbed wire fences, windbreak trees planted in tidy rows decades ago, by hands that understood shelter as an art. He noticed the lights to the left about the same time the last pink in the west decided it was done. At first he assumed a train 2 or 3 distant lamps rising and falling with grade, sliding parallel a mile away. but they held the road's rhythm, not the tracks. A train blinks differently, a cord of red and white that never quite aligns with engine speed. These lights mirrored the swell and fall of highway. Headlamps, twin points, then a wash of markers, as if a line of vehicles rode a road that didn't exist beside his, doing exactly what he was doing. He waited for some ordinary explanation to present itself. Parallel frontage roads happen. Access lanes run straight for a while before diving under bridges. But nothing on his map showed another line there. Dirt fields spread out to the left, a pale stubble under the night, and beyond them a band of scrub that dissolved into a dark, even plain. The mirror lights slipped in and out of slight dips, where the land folded modestly, like a sheet straightened by careful hands. The CB was low on 19, a habit more than a need. Static had a way of keeping you from talking to yourself. A voice crackled through with the gentle authority of a driver who had done midnight a lot longer than most. "Eastbound, you got an ag check open at 209, they said, then fell quiet. He let the information float there. That was hours behind him now. The radio quieted. The mirror lights stayed. He tried not to measure them, but people measure things even when they don't want to. 2 sets, then 3. One appeared to be a hi-hat box, the kind of roof that sits on owner-ops like a hat pulled low. Another set carried the high look of a car hauler's running lights. They never gained or fell, as if some agreed-upon space between him and them had been underlined in the night, and no one wanted to erase it. He passed a sign that hadn't been there last week. Temporary median crossover 2 miles. It was a routine thing out here. When miles of shoulder repair meant crews needed access. The arrow that followed was straightforward. He didn't care. The crossover was for law and maintenance. He stayed in lane, felt the rig breathe once in the mild wind, and settled again. The mirror lights to the left brightened slightly, as if in response. At mile marker 112, a portable arrow board rested on the shoulder ahead, its panel dark, its case closed. He registered it and moved on. As he drew even to it, the panel jumped to life. Amber bulbs traced a leftward chevron merge left, then flickered, then drew a straight line of dots that meant nothing. The board turned its instruction around like a person who had changed their mind mid-sentence. There was no work zone ahead, no cones, no flaggers. The lane lines continued uninterrupted. He tuned the CB up a hair and reached for the mic, then stopped, his hand hovering not from fear but from something else, a reluctance taught by the road. When the night offers you a shape you can't place, you don't always need to say something to it first. He had a handle from his early years, blue crane picked by an older driver in a lot one morning when a bird lifted from the ditch like a line of poetry. He hadn't used it on air for a while. He hadn't needed to. So, when the radio popped and a voice said, mild as a friend seated nearby, "Blue crane? Copy?" He tilted his head like someone overhearing their name in a crowded room. The voice was his. Not perfectly flatter, like it had been played through a tin can, but close enough that his own mouth didn't know what to do for a breath. He didn't answer. Something about echo deserves patience. The voice did not repeat itself. Static entered, did the little song that static does, then left as if duty had called it elsewhere. The lights off his left shoulder had istas and diver. Multiplied. Not closer. Just more. The phantom road, if that's what it was, seemed to have its own exits and returns, its own little decisions in the dark, all synchronized to his lane in a tidy and unnerving way. He saw a flash of hazard lights like a blink. In the corner of his eye, a wide load banner lifted, then lowered. You can imagine anything into the edge of sight at night. He told himself so, and sat very still with his hands relaxed on the wheel. He breathed. Past 114, the land dipped toward a dry riverbed. Cottonwoods clustered there, leaves whispering a wind that he couldn't feel in the cab. The bridge ahead wore the usual signs, including the one that always seemed slightly apologetic. Bridge ices before road. Summer didn't care. He touched the Jake to low to clean up speed for the descent, and let gravity do an amount of work measured in a quiet number. The rumble strip hummed when he brushed it, a musical note, as honest as a level on a tool bench. In the mirror to his left, which showed nothing more than the dark symmetry of highway and the long white trailer line, he caught the suggestion of a tanker gliding in perfect mirror. His right mirror showed emptiness and stars scattered like salt. He pressed his tongue to his back teeth and felt the simplicity of that action anchor him in his body. The bridge was as straight as a ruler. At the base of the descent, the median crossover opened like a neat cut. The CB set his handle again. "Blue crane, go left now. Wait flag at the bridge." His own voice, with a tone of mild urgency he had never liked in himself. The number he had just checked on his dash said otherwise. He was not overweight. The bridge was rated for far more than his load. He kept the wheel precisely where it was. When he didn't answer, the radio sighed the way air does when it leaves a small balloon, then went back to its small crackle. The portable aero board he'd seen before had reappeared ahead, or another just like it. The panel lit a left arrow, held it steady, then the bulbs misbehaved and offered a blinking pattern that meant nothing known to highway manuals. It was almost funny, if funny was allowed. He let the joke pass, without inviting it inside. He remembered an old conversation at a fuel island, with a driver whose logbook had creases worn in by miles older than most. The man had told him about a stretch in the plains that showed you a twin on hot nights, a second highway laid next to yours that existed for a while, then didn't. "Don't follow your echo," the man had said, almost apologizing to the gravel for needing to say it out loud. "Don't you turn toward anything that doesn't throw dust when it should. Count fence posts if you get doubtful. Sets of 5. Your eyes will try to make those sets into other numbers. Make them be 5. Works better if you can hear real bugs. Whatever it is that shows up doesn't copy insects well." It was not hot. The night air threaded the vents in thin, cool lines. But the prairie has a way of keeping old habits for its own reasons. He reached for an anchor. Anyway, the right-of-way fence marched alongside the lane, posts, and wire, the old cedar and the newer metal T-posts sharing the same duty. He counted them not to a goal, just to lay rails in his thoughts. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Start again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Anything that wanted to become a 13 or a 7 had to let go. Their world narrowed at the bridge, as bridges will do. On his left, no, not on his left. That would make it real somewhere in the part of sight that belongs to imagination. He saw red lamps queuing near the median cut. A pilot car's little amber gumball did a polite, slow spin. The flock of vehicles over there, if they were vehicles, signaled left with an almost friendly rhythm, like neighbors agreeing on which turn to take. His hands remained calm. He kept his line. Wind lives under bridges, even when the rest of the world holds still. As he rolled out the other side, the cross-rush greeted the trailer and let go. On the far side, the phantom highway, which had been so committed to keeping time, faltered. The lights stuttered like they remembered something they had forgotten. Then they were only reflections again. Plain starlight bounced off nothing. The shapes of late-night barns sitting still. Where they had always Saturday, he drove. The weirdness didn't hold on to him the way sometimes happens, where a moment lays claim to the next 100 miles. Instead it drifted, as fog does when the sun realizes it's late. He kept an eye on the road, and a portion of his mind carefully turned toward the ordinary. The hum of the tires returned to just being the hum of tires. The fence posts remained honest in their spacing. Crickets gathered themselves into song in the ditch, an undramatic chorus that knew more about night than any light could learn. The first rest area after the bridge was a modest one, a few spots, a building that was all clean lines and sensible signage, a soda machine that gave more change in nickels than anyone wanted. He didn't plan to stop. Plan change. He let the signal flick and made the turn in. Gravel shifted uncomplainingly under slow pressure. A couple of reefers sat humming on the far end, their owners inside asleep, fans turning their white noise into blankets. A driver in a faded ball cap sat on the curb with a thermos and nodded as Caden eased past. The nod said hello, and it also said I've seen things, and it also said no need to talk about any of it right now. He parked, set the brake, watched the small tremor in the hood settle as wind forgot about the truck again. He didn't turn off the engine. It was kinder to the batteries to let the alternator keep its conversation with them going at idle. He stepped down and stretched, arms and back careful, letting joints speak and then quiet. The stars had risen into their midnight positions. A bat drew a neat arc overhead. The air smelled faintly of alfalfa, and the dry sweetness of cut grass from earlier in the day. The driver from the curb spoke without preamble, the way a person does when the subject is obvious to both people in the room. "You got a twin tonight?" Caden took a breath that became a small laugh. "Look that way for a minute. They've been busy." The man wasn't old, but his eyes carried miles. Reflective tape stitched the bill of his cap in a way that made the light treat him gently. "Mirrors, some call 'em. Ghost Road, others. Best name I heard was the Ribbon. Shows up when it feels like. Don't know what stirs it. Weather, maybe? Or just the prairie remembering plans it had and letting them go again. They said there was supposed to be a second interstate here once, back before I was driving. Lines drawn, right-of-way bought. Then everybody changed their mind. Map never shows it," Caden said, "because it didn't. Maps get shy around certain topics," the man replied. He unscrewed his lid, poured a little coffee into it, and held it as if warming his hands mattered even in July. "You hear it too?" "Hear what?" "Yourself," the man said lightly. "Asking your own permission, in your own voice. That's a new trick. I've only had that happen twice. First time I went quiet for 100 miles just in case my words were somebody else's. It gets bored if you don't answer. It's like an echo that wants to lead instead of follow. You let echoes follow." Caden nodded. He hadn't thought of it that way, but the thought fit. "Counted fence posts," he said. And he felt odd saying something so simple, in reply to something so strange. That's the right religion out here. The man smiled, not unkindly. "I stick with the living when I can. Bugs singing? Good sign. Birds bickering in the barrow pit in the morning? Even better. They don't do a great job faking wildlife, whatever they are. Can't keep time with crickets. Won't bother a herd of pronghorn. You see something step into the beams that has a heartbeat and no plan for you? Believe it first." They sat for a while in companionable quiet. Somewhere in the building a hand dryer roared, and then gave up, and the click of a stall door taking its time echoed within proper walls. A semi rolled through on the main line with that low thrumming whoosh that can put a person to sleep if they let it. The night laid itself out long and safe in front of them. The other driver finished his small cup and capped it. "You've got a clean-looking rig," he said. "Mirrors, like clean lines. Makes their job easier. Don't give them too many edges. Put a strip of tape on the back of your mirror housing. Break up the silhouette. Or don't. Up to you. It's mostly in the head anyway. I'll let the map ride," Caden said. "That's the spirit." The man pulled himself up. "Safe, Miles." "You too," Caden answered. He went inside, washed his hands because that felt like a reset switch. The soap smelled faintly of orange. He dried his hands under the hand dryer that behaved itself, filled his bottle with water that ran clear and tasted like someone had remembered to care for the plumbing, and walked back across the lot with his steps measured and quiet. The twin didn't return that night. The rest of the run unfolded with an efficient calm. He dropped the glass at the receiver before dawn where a man with a clipboard made check marks with a fast, practiced speed. Paperwork looked better in the early light. He sent his availability with a fingertip, and then found a place to sleep where wind rubbed lightly against the cab like a cat. Sleep came easy. It had a depth that sometimes you have to earn. In his dream, if there was one, he drove the same stretch under a sky full of stars that had decided to be generous. He drove without a radio. The fence posts counted themselves. When he woke, the sun lay in thin sheets over the dash and made the world's dust look like confetti. He crossed that section a dozen times in the next 2 months. The twin showed up twice again, not as bright, more like a memory out of the corner of an eye. Each time, the same rules applied. Let echoes be echoes. Keep to the lane that threw gravel, where gravel should be thrown. Smile at the small things that prove you're moving through a world where physics keeps its promises. Bugs on the windshield, a dog asleep on a porch, hay bales wearing their twine ties in neat belts. He never saw a car move from the mirror road to his, not even across a trooper's median turn. They kept their distance like two lines on a page that veered close and then calmly away. Late in the season, when dusk decided earlier, he pulled into a farm supply store to use their lot as a lunch place, and he found an old wall map tacked near the counter beneath a faded poster of mineral blocks. The map showed the county with lines for roads, rivers, and the small squares of property that had been parceled out like tartan. Faintly, under the current interstate, was a dotted line that ran half as long and then stopped. "Initial corridor proposed," said tiny letters. The ink so faded it seemed ashamed of its certainty. A clerk bagged bolts nearby and noticed his interest. "That line didn't happen," they said without prompting. They thought 2 would be better. The weather disagreed, or the money changed its mind. Hard to say which. "I thought I saw it once," Caden said, almost to the paper. "A lot of folks thought that," the clerk replied, as if reporting the weather. Nothing wrong with seeing where plans went when they take a little walk. Don't let it change your lane. He paid for a bottle of washer fluid he didn't strictly need, because the map had been worth the time, and went back to the road, which sat where it always did, unassuming and true. On nights when the air was thin and the stars fussed less, the ribbon sometimes appeared far to his left like a promise it didn't intend to keep. It didn't bother him anymore. He learned the shapes it took the patient convoy with all its little lights, the one car too quick with their blinkers, the arrow board that couldn't remember what it wanted to say. He learned to use living noise as his compass, the soft kite-and-scrape rhythm of crickets, the feathered flutter and sudden decision of an owl. Whenever he reached the bridge at 114, the bridge ices before road sign wore its usual resigned wisdom. He liked it for that. The world made sense when even a warning sign was calm. If anybody had asked him about it later, he would have offered what the prairie had given him in return for attention. Some nights a road will show you a reflection of itself because the air is tired, and light is curious, and memory is a powerful instrument. It isn't an invitation. It isn't a test. It's just something that happens when big flat places hold a straight line so long that space decides to practice harmonies. You don't have to follow every harmony. You can keep your own melody and be fine. Count fence posts if you need to. Trust that bugs know best. And when a voice speaks with your mouth and tells you to turn, you can let the radio be a radio and the bridge be a bridge and the night be a night. The glass will arrive uncracked. The dawn will arrive on time. The road will be the same road it's always been, quietly taking you exactly where it said it would. Story number 4. Jules ran the coastal nights when the heat had finished talking and the tide hadn't decided what to do next. The old causeway stitched marsh to marsh, with a thin seam of concrete and low rail, a straight line the color of pale shells. On either side, the grass went on forever, blades holding beads of brackish water like necklace pearls. Air moved in long, careful breaths. In it lived the small, clean smells a person can love: pluff mud with its soft sweetness, salt that woke the tongue just by suggestion, and the green scent of Spartina cut by wind. The run was simple on paper, a refrigerated trailer full of farm produce headed to a warehouse inland before sunup. Dispatch had circled the route with a pen and written a time window that was generous if a person didn't waste the world's patience. Jules didn't waste anything. The cab held steady at a sound just above a purr. The instruments glowed like small moons. On the passenger seat, a thermos stood watch. The CB lay low, a background whisper just enough to keep silence from feeling lonely. The approach to the causeway always came with a change in the world's posture. Pines gave up their sentry duty, and the wind slipped along the ground instead of through branches. A battered green sign with reflective letters spoke its piece. Causeway, 9 miles. Low shooter. Watch for fog. The letters had been replaced not long ago. The bolt still had a proud shine. A taller sign carried older advice in black on white. Drawbridge controlled by signal. And, lower than the rest, a sign Jules always noticed and never quite felt used to: Mariners Monitor H13. It belonged to a different audience, and yet here it was. The first half-mile rose just enough to let the whole marsh open up like a book. Night had draped itself well. No moon, just a slow push of distant stars. Out on the water cuts, something glowed in delicate streaks, a pale ribbon under the surface. Phosphorescence, the kind that wakes up when anything disturbs it. Every once in a while a mullet jumped with a clean silver arc, and the water wrote green light where it fell back. Marker poles stood at intervals in the water, striped black and white, as if the marsh wore a uniform. Osprey nests sat like careful hats on some of the taller posts, the birds sleeping with faces tucked, patient with the wind. The guardrail on the road was modest, a short, honest rim with reflectors that winked whenever headlamps asked them to. A little way in, the night decided to fold itself into fog. It came from the creek like a contented animal, not pouncing, just arriving and testing the air with a paw. Jules eased onto a rhythm that worked for Fog, good speed, held steady, no sudden brightness, a light foot on the brake now and then just to keep the pads in conversation with the rotors. The lane lines wore beads of water that caught the light in a hush. The world shrank politely to what was needed. 3 dashed stripes ahead, the edge, the steady center. The drawbridge sat out there in the middle like a quiet thought. Its shape was simple and old. A center pivot with 2 leaves. Control house perched on a concrete island like a square lantern. 2 traffic signals hung high on wires, one for each direction, and a bell that belonged to railroads had been repurposed to say what it needed to say about stopping. Tonight the bell didn't ring. The signal showed green and stayed generous. The fog took more space for itself, but the light reached. Jules kept it smooth. Half her mind counted reflectors left, right, and the other listened for the small natural sounds that prove you are in the world and not dreaming a world. Frogs did their steady arithmetic in the ditches. Something with wings cut once and twice through the darkness and went on with its work. That's when the radio began speaking a language that wasn't CB. It came in as a hush and then as a voice that sounded like a person in a room with metal walls, the way old speakers put a certain tin roof on syllables. Northbound freight, the voice said in a calm, practiced tone. Hold your green. Tide is slack at Bennett Narrows. It was not talking to her, not in the way that requires answers, but the words settled into the cab like old instructions returning from a long walk. Northbound freight. Hold your green. Jules didn't reach for the mic. She wouldn't have hit the right transmit anyway. The radio on her shelf was CB, not VHF. And in any case, you don't put your hand out to shake a greeting until you understand who you're greeting. She let the words join the hum of the engine and become part of the night. On the water to either side, the glow drew lines as fish moved, and then forgot to glow again. The causeway ran straight for a long mile, then it made a proper bend to follow the old creek's insistence. As the curve approached, the voice returned. One long for the bend, it suggested. Jules smiled despite not being in the habit of smiling alone. On boats, one long horn means approaching a bend where visibility is limited. On highways, horn was for emergencies and greetings. She didn't sound it. She didn't need to explain herself to Fog. Still, her hand made a phantom motion near the pull cord before she returned it to the wheel. The drawbridge grew out of milky air and took its place ahead. The traffic signal held its green like a promise. To the left and right, the lane control lights on the bridge showed a simple message. Arrows good, X, no. All arrows for her side glowed in a forgiving color. No boats moved in the channel. No wake. Everything water touched was still, except for the small lights that flickered under the surface whenever anything lived there chose to breathe. The bell rang once, a single polite chime, not the usual urgent clanging that churned the air when the bridge decided to swing. The signal turned amber for the length of a patient inhale. Jules prepared herself to stop if the arms dropped. The arms did not move. The amber held another breath and then returned to green. The bell, embarrassed, said nothing else. She crossed the seam where concrete became steel. The tires sang a brief, honest note. And we're done. As she passed the control house, she glanced without meaning to. The window wore reflections of red and green navigation lights from the water below. Inside, a desk sat tidy with a lamp that in this hour ought to have been off and was not. An old microphone lay in its stand, as if someone had just put a hand on it and then gone into another room. No figure moved. The light was steady, the kind of steady that looks like someone leaving a lamp on to convince themselves there will be no surprises. Down off the bridge, fog thickened for 3 minutes. Jules checked the clock because sometimes the mind likes a fixed number when the eyes can't have one. It was the kind of fog that gently takes away the world and hands it back one piece at a time. The rumble strip told her when the right tire got familiar with it and she drifted a whisper left. She centered again. The frogs went about their small business. A light laughter of night birds moved across the marsh, low and fast. Her radio rustled with someone else's time. Channel clear, the same voice said, threading through. Small craft standby at dayboard 6. Northbound freight. Use center line under the trestle. Watch for wind at 2 knots. Steady. He had the sound of a man who had spoken the same phrases for years. and learned to place them in a way that coaxed everyone into being competent. Jules held the center quietly. The only trestle around here belonged to an old rail spur that hadn't seen wheels in a decade. It still cut the marsh on stilts, as if it expected its train at any moment. Tonight, something in the fog positioned it like a landmark in a story, useful even without its old job. The phosphorescence felt closer now, as if the marsh wanted to show her a dotted line. Every time her wheels rolled past a certain joint in the pavement, the water to her right stitched a brief green seam under the fog. It didn't happen to her left. Fog likes to be specific. She thought of someone she had learned from early on, a driver named Kip, who had the sort of information in his eyes that comes from letting the world teach you slowly. Kip had shown her the causeway in daylight once, and spoken about the tide, as if it had the same moral weight as gravity. "Mind the tide even if you can't see it," he'd said, pointing with his chin at crooked posts hammered into soft bottom. Roads laid on top of old decisions. You behave, it behaves. Simple enough. Kip had retired years back to a small house with a lemon tree. He had liked radios, the live ones, and the kind that existed in a person's head when you drive for hours without any voice but your own. The second half of the causeway straightened and stretched. Across the marsh, a red light blinked on a cell tower, slowed by fog until each pulse felt like a heartbeat. Bakers in a town miles away were probably mixing things, turning flour and kindness into something that would steam when broken open. Jules kept a steady pace and let her thoughts skim just above the surface of attention like skates on thin ice. A single windshield wiper squeaked and then settled to a smoother whisper when she touched the switch. The road let go of some water. The fog lifted slightly as if appreciating the courtesy. For a breath she could see the line of reflector posts ahead like the bones of a spine. Then it returned again, not as thick, like a thought revisited. At mile marker 5, marked not by the usual green sign but by a short tide board in the marsh stamped with a black 5 that had long ago let salt nibble its edges, the radio lifted its voice once more. "Crossing at 5, it said. "Bridge house copies. Let her through." The reply, if there was one, was only the sound of fog becoming part of itself again. The bell at the drawbridge in the distance made one quiet strike, as if acknowledging a note on a list. Jules reached the last bend, the place where the causeway met the mainland, as if nothing unusual had happened at all. The final guardrail end took its neat turn toward dirt. The fog stepped aside to show the long run of trees beyond the marsh, black and kind. The radio quieted the way a friend does when a point has been made and there's no brag in it. On the inland side, a rest pullout offered space for 3 rigs and 1 battered picnic table. She didn't stop. The run needed to keep clean if she wanted the receiver to be pleased by dawn, but she slowed a hair just to look. On the table sat a small metal box that had been maybe for brochures once. The lid was closed. On its face, a sticker had curled back from one corner. A simple anchor had been printed on it, nothing else. The design was old, thick lines. Jules went on, wheels speaking in their steady language, time answering with its softly ticking one. She made her delivery just as the eastern sky decided it wanted to move from slate to the first hint of blue. The lot lights above the dock wore halos that thinned as she watched. The receiving clerk, a woman with a pencil tucked in hair, signed without fanfare and handed the papers back with a mechanical thank you that was nonetheless sincere. Jules nodded, stacked her copies, and walked the length of the trailer once more for habit, placing a hand on the skin of it as if checking a horse. When she got back in the cab, some small weight clicked behind the cup holder. She reached down and found a coin wedged where no coin ought to be. It was heavy for its size, worn smooth at the edges by years of palms. An anchor sat in the middle, the same simple shape as the sticker. The year stamped faintly near the bottom had lost its last digit to use. The remaining 3 placed it decades back. She didn't make a wish. She didn't throw it anywhere. She cleaned the slot with the edge of a napkin and set the coin on the dash where the sun would warm it later. It sat there without comment. Sleep took her easily in a lot, not far away, the kind with a decent line of shade and a cat that made rounds like a manager. When she woke late morning and went inside to pay for coffee, the register sat under a wall of old photos, boats hauled out for paint, a view of the causeway in bright noon, a shot of the drawbridge from the water, when a shrimp trawler held the world's attention. In one frame, a man stood in the control house doorway in a uniform shirt that made a person want to be polite. He had the ease of someone whose job had left a familiar crease in his shoulders. The caption in cursive under the shot said, Kepler, Kip Jones, bridge tender, 1,970. 1,992. A pen mark had later added, and our friend forever. The clerk saw her looking. He kept us moving through storms, they said. When the radio went out, folks swore they could still hear him, telling slow boats to hold off, telling barges to mind the wind. He passed quiet a long time ago. Bridge goes automatic these days most nights. But sometimes I hear the bell blink once on my back porch and think, okay, somebody's crossing. Jules didn't mention the voice that had spoken on her CB, as if it had learned a second life in a different band. She pointed at the photo instead and smiled lightly. I had a teacher named Kip once, she said. Different road, same tone. You don't forget voices like that, the clerk replied, capturing bills under the clip of a register that clicked with pleasure. They teach you to keep things gentle. Jules ran the causeway again the following week, then the week after. On bright nights, the marsh lay silver and plain like a calm breath. On fog nights, she fell into the rhythm of it without thinking too much. She learned the small clues that made her feel held. The way tides leave glimmering mussel shells in thin arcs near the shoulder. The specific sound frogs make when the air is damp enough for them to be loud and loose. She didn't chase odd things. She let them arrive if they wanted, and left them to leave when they were done. Sometimes the bell at the drawbridge tapped once when the signal turned green and the bridge stayed asleep. Sometimes phosphorescence gathered itself into two bright commas at the edge of the channel and then separated, as if punctuation preferred to travel. On 2 occasions when fog went stubborn and paint on the lane lines was tired, the radio sent small practical notes in a human voice. Watch wind on the spans. Keep center under the trestle. It never asked her to answer. It never said her name. It treated her as northbound freight, a phrase so kind and impersonal it felt like a compliment. On mornings when the world held that particular pale gold that means the sun is trying hard not to wake anyone, she would sometimes see a pelican on the railing of the little control house. A long bird that looked like it had filed taxes and paid its bills and was now ready for a nap. It would watch her go by from the corner of one eye and then look back out at water. The lamp inside would be off, proper in daylight. The desk would hold its shape. On one visit, a man with a paintbrush was touching the bolts of the guardrail and humming a tune Jules didn't know. She lifted her hand, and he lifted his, the way people do when their jobs keep the same things safe. If anyone asked later, not in a way that required proof, just in a way that wanted a story to carry on the road, Jules would say the causeway keeps 2 languages and sometimes speaks both at once at night. The highway has its greens and ambers and the bell that belongs to rails but found purpose here. The water has its boards and lights and voice channels and tradition of one long at a blind bend. Memory, like tide, goes where it wants. Every now and then it rises and lays a hand across places that happen to be built on top of one another. If a person is awake, attentive, and kind about not demanding too much from mystery, they can be guided as neatly as a skiff in a fog. She kept the coin on the dash. It warmed under sunlight, cooled under stars, lived there the way a good luck thing will without making a fuss. When fog slid onto the road and stitched itself to the marsh again, she drove as if listening just a little more closely without making that fact an announcement. Northbound freight. Hold your green, said the air, or maybe the thought. She did. And every time, the marsh opened like a book again, and the dark gave the world back piece by piece, and the inland trees waited with their easy patience. Story number 5. She crossed the high tablelands at hours, when the sky seemed to rest on the earth with no seam between them. Tamsin liked it that way. No traffic, but the occasional set of small lights far behind. No towns for a long stretch, just the sound that big air makes when it moves over short grass. Her route took her through wind country, a plateau of turbines that stood like quiet metronomes with red beacons that blinked in slow unison. The cargo was simple, sealed crates of network hardware quiet boxes that didn't mind a lullaby of hum and wind. The dash glowed a gentle amber. The CB breathed in a low, steady static that softened the edges of silence. A sign before the climb announced it like a cousin at the door. High wind area next. 23 miles. Trucks. Use right lane. Another said, with more optimism than the prairie usually allowed, next services 82 miles. The night had that thin, papery feel thunderstorms bring when their faraway sheet lightning twinged behind distant clouds, and the smell of dust and hidden rain braided itself through the vents, a scent like metal gently washed. Out on the ranch land, the fence posts walked along in pairs. Grass wore its green quietly, silver when her beams glanced it. The turbines ahead blinked their red, then waited, then did it again, like a quiet choir breathing together. She eased into the right lane out of respect. Wind can tattle on impatience. Somewhere to the south, thunder muttered like a tired radio. Her speed settled in that range where a long trailer feels tethered and calm. The wheel gave just a little in cross gusts, the way a dog leans and tests your attention on a leash and then behaves. The CB coughed once and fell back to its low murmur. At mile marker 311, the air changed. Not wildly, not the sudden slap a cold front gives a face, just a quiet rearranging. Static kissed the cabin, in a soft, dry prickle. Tiny blue glows appeared where rubber met paint and metal met air. The tips of her CB antenna gathered faint halos like a child's drawing of light. A thin, delicate note almost too high to be called sound lived somewhere between her wipers and the hood, then drifted away. In street, Elmo's fire. She'd only heard about it from older hands, the ones who liked to talk about science without calling it science. Lightning in small clothes, they'd said. Dock workers saw it on ship masts. Pilots saw it on wings. Out here, sometimes the trucks wore it when storm air forgot where to put its extra electricity. She kept her breathing even. There was nothing wrong with a little light finding edges at night. It was just the sky playing with itself. The road offered a rhythm. The turbines obliged with their steady blink. The red lamps went dark together, then together lit. A slow heartbeat scattered across the horizon. Her radio woke up to something that wasn't Channel 19. Not a voice from the highway, but from some other room. Row E, Tower 9 offline. Reset to slow blink, a man said, like someone making notes aloud while walking along a fence line. Hector, you copy? Wind steady at 23. Keep your trucks at the fence until the wave passes. There was no fence crossing the highway here. The ranch fences were well back. Tamsin eased off the volume knob to be certain the sound was truly hers, and not some layer of imagination laid over wind. It was there, calm, competent, speaking to someone who was not her and yet could have been any of them, the way instructions can be. She thought of something she'd heard once at a cafe in a town with a name like a bar joke. Lost Spring, maybe. A driver with hands that had learned patience from 1,000 loading docks told a few of them about the singing lights. Not ghosts, he said, and not angels. Just the big air and the big machines agreeing on a rhythm. There's a tech who used to talk people through the viaduct on storm nights, he mentioned, stirring sugar into coffee he'd then drink black anyway. He liked 8s, 8 seconds between, pulses, then go. He retired. They say sometimes his checks go out on skip and ride your CB when the sky is right. The viaduct came at mile 314, a long concrete ribbon stretched across a sharp-walled draw where wind practiced its knots. Everyone in the business knew it. A place where inattentive loads learned humility. Signs marked it cleanly. Crosswinds on bridge. No passing. The turbines ran up to the edge of the drop and stepped politely back. Their red lights pulsed, as before then changed. It wasn't dramatic. No choreographed fireworks. Just a subtle pull out of unison. A wave formed from west to east, so gently she might have missed it if she'd blinked. Red. 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 Like dominoes deciding to fall, but not quite. The radio came again, calm and present. Wind gust on the draw in 9 seconds, the man's voice said. Count the red. On 8, you'll feel it go slack. Let the trailer breathe there. No heroics. She didn't reach for the mic. The batteriness of the air told her this wasn't a conversation with her end in it. She watched the line of lights. Red blinked along the ridge, as if a hand slid just under their timing. She counted as a person counts to soothe a nervous animal. 1, 2, 3. She adjusted with small movements. 4, 5, 6. Her hands found the kind of steadiness that lives under caution. 7. The glow at her antenna tips softened and then strengthened, oddly in time. On 8, the cross push at the trailer's shoulder sighed and let go. She felt it in her ribs, a held breath released. She eased a fraction more throttle, not much so the rig wouldn't become a sail in a lull. On 9 and 10, the gust arrived again, stronger, the kind that could bully if given permission. It found her already moving properly, already settled. It shrugged and passed down the draw to go bother someone uninterested. At the far side, the viaduct poured her back onto ordinary prairie. The radio cleared its throat. The man spoke like a person who'd finished what he'd meant to do and was now just making sure all the animals were inside the fence. "Wave 3, late by 2, he said. "Not bad. Rowie back online. Hector, you can let them roll." She drove, not liking to admit relief, but letting her shoulders do what shoulders will do when a slow hazard ends. A service road peeled off to the right a mile ahead. Private, dirt, lined with a gate that had learned about weather for years. The gate wore a number on a sun-bitten aluminum plate. 19. The number made her smile because of the radio channel, because of coincidence. Inside the fence, a white pickup sat angled toward the field. Its amber beacon, the boring, necessary kind that looks like a small beehive, was off. No people moved in its lights, if it had any. It was merely parked, as if the night had asked it to stand still, and it had obliged. As she drew parallel to the gate, the faint blue glows on her mirror mounts hissed brighter and then sank. The turbine's red beacons returned to their shared heartbeat. The sky held its lacework of sheet lightning, far away now, tired of performing. The CB, finally sounding like itself again, filled with ordinary chatter, someone reporting a blown strap near mile 240, someone else looking for a diner where the pancakes were truly round. The rest of the high stretch wore the same nerve, smoothed, long, low wind that wanted attention but didn't demand it. Road that told the truth under her tires. A herd of pronghorn in the distance turned their gleaming heads in unison to watch her pass. Their eyes did not shine red, not anything dramatic, just animal eyes reflecting light the way eyes do. Birds slept on fence wires with the dignity of monks. She took the exit after the services sign, though the services were still far ahead. The pull-through lot of a closed wayside offered space to breathe, and a view of the land, like a big, folded map. A maintenance yard sat behind a chain-link fence, tidy, with a trailer that had a state seal sun-faded on its side. On the trailer's door, a laminated sheet with a list of numbers had been taped under scratched plastic. The first line read, "Wind farm shift contacts." Names and numbers followed. The third name down, H. Ruiz. In parentheses, in pen more recent than the typeset, Hector. Someone had looped a smiley face next to it, the kind people draw without irony when they've set their tools down and had a good day. She didn't call. There was nothing to ask that would sound normal out of her mouth. She stepped down, stretched, and let the night air comb her hair. The blue glows on the mirror mounts were gone now. The world's electricity had found other edges to entertain. The whine from the turbines, if there had been one, did not exist here. Those machines are quieter than people who haven't met them think. What you heard was wind. Or not. Back inside, she sat with the wheel for a moment and thought of how many forms guidance can take. Old paint on a bridge. A bell that rings too gently to be official. A voice from another desk. Lights that choose when to agree and when to disagree. In the next town, Sleepy, one light flashing yellow, a gas station with murals of a steer on cinder block walls. She stopped for coffee. The clerk had a baseball game on low in a language that carried all the meanings whether or not you knew the words. The bulletin board by the ice freezer held a stack of community notices. The top one, a memorial for a man with a kind, tired face wearing a hard hat and a jacket with reflective stripes. Under his photo, Hector Ruiz, field technician, friend, dates, a little drawing of a wind turbine, like a child had added it. The notice spoke about a person who never let a storm make anyone feel small. It said he had retired and then left his boots a season later, a phrase that felt like the region, practical and tender. "We honor the way he kept us moving," the flyer said. "He timed things right." The clerk noticed her looking and came over with the easy courtesy of a place where people expect to talk for a minute. "Good man," they said. Some nights he could read the lights out there like a metronome. He'd call folks he knew ran through the viaduct and tell him when to hit it. "We got the number off the gate posted when the state moved the yard. Phones ring still sometimes in wind." People say the static bounces, and you can hear a line from his checklists on your radio. Spooky. Nice kind of spooky, you know? Kind, Tamsin echoed. Because it was the best word and because her throat didn't open for anything else. Keep it steady through there, the clerk added, then grinned. I don't have to tell you that. She left the coffee shop with a warmer cup than last time, and with the names of the next 2 towns nested gently in her head like eggs. Work called, quietly. The best way. The road took her to it. A week later, she crossed the same stretch under a different sky, one of those clear nights that looks like it moved in pieces of glass into the ceiling. No distant storms, just wind doing its regular remarks and the red blink of turbine beacons appearing and disappearing like thoughtful eyes. The viaduct came and went without incident, the way things do when you respect them and they respect you back. She didn't hear the voice. The radio kept to its usual local concerns, but she counted anyway, just once, on the far side 1 through 8 because habit and gratitude share a wall with one another. The blue fringe light visited her again another month later, when heat piled up during the day and the first dry fronts of autumn wandered across the plains in the night. It whispered around her antenna like a cat's whiskers catching light. On the radio, just as she reached the long shadow of the draw, a small, steady phrase traveled to her, close to the sound you can mistake for your own thought. On 8, it offered. Not 7, 8. She kept her mouth closed, kept her hands gentle, and let the advice click into place like a gear the machine had been waiting for. The wave passed. She crossed, a very large thing moving with very small drama. On the far side, the red lights found their agreement again and blinked together as if to say, all right, we're done. If anybody asked later, in daylight over a sandwich or at 3 a.m., with the soft company of diesel idle around them, she would not make more of it than it was. This part of the country builds tall things and asks them to stand in big air. Weather is a long conversation here. Sometimes a person who learned that conversation very well leaves a little of it in the wires and the air for others to borrow. The trick is simple. Watch what the land is doing. Listen to the patterns set by careful hands, and time your crossing so the wind doesn't decide your night for you. On her dash shelf, tucked beside a paper atlas and a little first aid kit, she kept a rubber band snapped around a slip of paper with a phone number, half faded from sun and use. Someone at the convenience store had offered it with a shrug. If you hit a true bad one, they'd said. Somebody answers sometimes. Maybe it's just the new shift. Maybe it's just voicemail. Folks leave messages for Hector. They'd added with a half smile that carried no mockery, only affection. Tamsin hadn't called. It was enough to know there was a line, woven out of wind and wire, and the good habits of people who want everyone to arrive. On high nights, when the static came to visit and draw little coronas on every sharp thing, she would sometimes ride the count in her head 1 through 8, a tiny, steady metronome behind the bigger metronome of the red lights. If the turbines decided to disagree, she watched where the wave began and where it ran, and she let that inform what her hands already knew. When the draw opened and the world on the other side waited patiently to receive her, she would breathe out like someone stepping through a doorway they'd measured twice. The prairie, generous and ancient and in no hurry at all, would fold in around road and rig and let them pass. Story number 6. Rowan liked stretches that took him under mountains rather than over them. Tunnels tidied the landscape into one idea at a time. The road came down, the hill rose up, and an agreement was made. He was hauling dry goods overnight to a chain of small stores that liked their shelves topped off before daybreak. The route threaded a twin-bore tunnel through a ridge with a name the maps treated like a family secret: old stone, old trees, long memory. At this hour, the traffic thinned to occasional pairs of headlights. The dash glowed with a soft confidence. The CB murmured at a low volume. More company than conversation. Signs before the grade announced the boundary with a calm that had likely been printed by 3 generations of vendors. 2 Nell, 2 miles. Lights on, no hazmats in bore. The air cooled as he dropped through the cut. Tunnels often collect night the way churches collect quiet. A light mist lived in the low places from late rain. Reflectors along the barrier blinked as if they had been promised a careful listener. He checked his speed, not out of worry but because rhythm matters here. The tunnel mouths were twin ovals rimmed in concrete. The right bore, the one he would take, wore a necklace of yellow lamps. The left was closed for maintenance, a row of red X's above the lanes as gentle and absolute as bedtime. A digital sign near the face offered an unfamiliar instruction. Vent. Test active. Maintain. 38 miles per hour. Do not stop. 38 felt like a number chosen by a person rather than a committee. He smiled at it without meaning to, and eased the rig to match. On the last approach, a small square sign he didn't remember from any previous run blinked a line that might have belonged to boats, or trains, or some old discipline that tunnels share. Keep lane center. Do not pass. Do not broadcast. Broadcast? He touched the CB knob out of habit, and then left it alone. A white service pickup idled under the maintenance canopy beside the closed bore with its amber beacon dark. Two workers in hard hats stood by a cart, shapes against the security lights, not fussed by his arrival, not interested in being characters in anyone's story. He took the right bore, the truck's sound becoming a low chord as concrete took over the acoustics. Inside, the world trimmed itself to lanes and tile and regular lighting. The ventilation fans overhead were the slow kind, built big, and meant to hum rather than whine. Emergency alcoves numbered along the right wall at precise intervals, each with a green phone handset and a painted door. 11, 13, 15. The numbers smiled at mathematics and kept going. Rowan drove the center. 38 had the feel of something practiced and found true. Half a minute in, the radio changed its mind about being a highway thing. A voice came through with the crispness of an old intercom. The kind that puts a metallic lid on vowels. Bore ops to all points, it said, kindly and busy. Ventilation cycle begins in 1:80. Reverse on North Fan Bank at 1:60. Personnel clear east walkway. Repeat. Clear east walkway. Hold your spacing at 300. 1:80. Eddie I. No channel marker announced itself. No call to 19, no name. Just a note that made sense to someone standing under a bank of dials in a room that smelled like dust and hot electrical things. Rowan didn't touch the mic. The numbers wrote themselves into his mind anyway, as numbers do when the person speaking them sounds like they've been speaking them for years. The tunnel unrolled itself in sections, lights lined in long rows like stitches. Overhead, a gentle shiver passed along the housings as a fan somewhere far ahead or far behind decided to wake another notch. The low hum rose, leaned, and then settled. The signs on the wall exit 1.7 miles, exit 1.6 miles did their duty. The phone alcoves continued. 17, 19, 21. He kept his hands light and watched the bevel where wall met lane, an old trick for keeping position when the world narrows. The voice came again, not urgent, just present. Stage 2 at 1:20. All doors latched. East walkway occupant, present to phone. Rowan looked toward the right because anything named pulls eyes. The alcove passing nearest wore 23 inches reflective paint. The handset hung in its cradle, green and cheerful. No one stood in the little rectangle of light beyond the glass. Present to phone repeated in his head, not for him. Ahead, the road breathed. Not the way roads breathe when a big rig passes. No. This was a change in the air itself. A tug that spoke of something big preparing to change direction. Numbers on big fans matter. They decide the mood of the place. He felt static kisses tickle the hairs on his arm, that small electricity tunnels collect in certain weather. The digital overhead sign offered a timer he'd never seen lit in this bore. It counted down from 90 inches big, clear digits, white on black. The instruction below stayed steady. Maintain 38. Do not stop. He adjusted a breath, not because he needed to, just to put it on the same page as everything else. The engine sounded pleased. The trailer walked true. The countdown dropped to 60. To either side, a thread of dust woke from somewhere and wrote a delicate line in the headlight beam, showing him air in motion. At 45, his CB clicked as if someone had depressed a mic somewhere nearby. The voice returned. Reverse in 20, it said. Center your lane. No brakes on the cycle. No brakes on the cycle. He let the weight roll and felt it like a careful hand on the shoulder of the truck. At 5, the fans around the bend woke in a new way. The low hum stepped through a deeper chord. and a soft tug at the face of the rig announced the change, as if a room had opened a window on the far side. Air reversed. He could feel it in his cheeks and in the way the trailer eased its small fidgets. Dust that had been flowing one direction decided to go the other without argument. He was, for a curious breath, inside the machine. It wanted 38. He gave it 38. He felt the urge to touch the brake the way you feel an itch you're not supposed to scratch, and left it alone. The lesson slid under the tires in a bright, clean way. The overhead timer ticked up now 10, 20, 30, as if counting time spent in the new pattern. The alcoves continued their arithmetic. 27, 29, 31. Then something strange and small happened. He passed an exit 1.3 miles sign, and then another exit 1.3 miles sign before the distance could make that much change. The second one had a scratch across the face, a diagonal line like a small child had tested a key against it. He would not have noticed if the world hadn't invited him to notice numbers. But once noticed, it sat quietly in his mind. He kept the wheel exactly where he liked it, and let the tunnel do whatever it wanted to do about math. On the radio, a second voice arrived, lighter, higher, someone comfortable in the same room as the first, but without the same authority. "I've got a green on the south gate," they said. "Bore clear of pedestrians. East walkway still shows occupied." The first voice, the one with the unhurried cadence, answered gently. "Copy. If occupied, occupant is stubborn. We don't ask twice." Rowan, not for the first time in his work life, felt the odd sensation of being a guest at a party where everyone else knew each other. He checked his mirrors out of habit. Behind him, the tunnel slipstreamed away in neat diminishing bands of light. Ahead, the world narrowed, and then widened, and then narrowed like someone breathing. The digital timer rolled past 90. The fans sang in their new key, with the contentment of tools in proper use. At the halfway wall, a thick shape where air shafts and maintenance rooms live, he saw a small door with a square of opaque glass painted with a number, 17. It belonged to maintenance, not to traffic. As his lights touched it, the square brightened as if a lamp had turned on behind the glass. A phone rang, a clear, old-fashioned sound that lived in the tunnel very well. It was exactly the tone you picture when you picture a green phone ringing in a place built to be practical. He drove past it. The ringing remained the right size for the door and did not make demands. Ahead, a panel sign that normally spoke in simple messages lifted an unfamiliar sentence. "Release stage in 90 seconds. Row east clear." He almost laughed because the row of letters struggling to stay inside the rules of the sign gave the message a stiff grace. The radio agreed with the sign in its own way. "Stage release in 1, the calm voice said. "You've got a lull in the middle, then one more pull. Drivers maintain, no stopping." He did what he had been asked. In the lull, the truck felt briefly too light, like a boat that has crested a small wave and thinks for half a second about flying. In the pull, the trailer leaned a whisper left as air braided around its corners in a way that made sense to some engineer who had measured such things with a pencil. He kept his center. 38, 38, 38. When the change settled, the timer at the top blinked, thought about its next task, and disappeared. The fans stayed with their gentler chord, the kind you feel in your collarbone. The exit signs returned to reasonable intervals. 0.8 miles, 0.6. A small line of water crawled across the lane ahead where condensation made a tiny river. It ran toward him, which meant the grade pointed back, which meant he was climbing a little. That pleased him more than it should have. The math wanted forgiveness, and got it. He emerged into cool night, like a swimmer finding air. The ovals of the tunnel mouths fell behind. The closed-bore's maintenance canopy glowed in man-made yellow. On the right shoulder just past the exit, a turnout held a low building with an inset window. Inside, someone sat at a desk with 3 computer screens and a neat stack of paper maps folded to attention. The person didn't look up. They were busy being necessary to the place. The white service pickup slept by the door, with its hood pointed toward the road like a dog ready to go if called. The radio, suddenly bashful, returned to highway topics. A voice asked about weather 2 counties away. Another mentioned a deer at mile 201 that had changed its mind at the last second. Rowan eased up to highway speed, felt the truck's eagerness to be large in open air again, and matched it. He checked his mirrors. The boar receded without having to be watched. The next place to stop on that side of the ridge was a small plaza nested into trees that had learned how to grow around concrete. He pulled in to stretch, mostly to thank his legs for participating in the evening. A maintenance truck idled 2 spaces down, state seal on the door, amber beacon doing its lazy, thoughtful turn. A man and a woman in reflective jackets stood by the back bumper with paper cups that steamed. The jacket on the man's shoulders hung loose like he had shrunk since he'd first put it on. He nodded in the way people nod when talking is optional. "Nice run," he said, the sound of it not curious, just acknowledging the thing they all share. "You caught a test." "Felt like a test," Rowan answered. He didn't explain the numbers. He didn't need to. The woman smiled, her face bright in the kind security light that makes everyone look a little like a photograph from the early 90s. "They reverse the fans a couple nights a month," she said. "Clears the ducts, keeps the place honest. We put it on the board, but sometimes those signs trigger a mile late. Old copper in the hill likes to take its time. Folks with radios pick us up in funny places." "Funny places," he repeated, rolling the phrase around, because it fit. The man sipped and pointed with his chin toward the ridge, a gesture that carried history. Back when they first installed that system, the boss would stand in the control room and call it by numbers all the way through. People swear they still hear him sometimes when the static's right. He had this gentle way of saying things. Wouldn't spook a fawn if he was running it. Some of the phone circuits still ring on their own, drives the new kids crazy. He laughed without malice. "We tell them to leave any handset where it hangs and keep doing their job." The woman glanced at his cab with a mechanic's affection. "You kept off the brakes," she said. "You can tell by how quiet a rig comes out." Folks mean well. They feel the air change and stab at it. Makes the trailer walk. Your way's better. Same rules as crossing a narrow bridge when the wind thinks it's funny. He nodded, feeling a little seen in a way that pleased him. 38, he said. That number made sense. "It's a good number," the man said, as if stating a simple fact about the world. "Feels right in your bones." Rowan went inside, bought coffee from a machine that offered more options than a person needs, and stood by the window while the cup filled with its loud, cheerful promise. On a corkboard by the door, a tacked flyer showed a grainy photo of the tunnel's interior from years back. The lights were different then, warmer and closer. A caption in thinner ink noted a ventilation upgrade, a date that sat 2 decades behind his own. Someone had written a note on the flyer in pen. "Fan 6. Hums better. After rain." It looked like the handwriting of someone who cared for machines and wanted them to know it. He drove on, the ridge at his back, night flattening into a quiet lane that belonged to him for this small slice of time. He did not hear the tunnel voice again, not on that run. It did not need to repeat itself when its lesson had landed. The ridge wore its darkness well, its trees like rows of shoulders holding the earth in place. A week later, on the return loop running the opposite direction at the same hour, because patterns please dispatch, and sometimes the road too, he entered the other bore, the one that had been closed. Fresh paint winked from the alcove doors where someone had decided green should look more like new leaves. The sign lit with calm certainty. Vent test active. Maintain 38 miles per hour. He smiled at it like you smile at a clerk who remembers your order. The fans spoke their language again. The numbers counted down, and somewhere near the middle where a door marked 17 would be on the other side, he heard a phone ring once, cleanly, like a small bell. He let it ring. He kept the lane. He let the tunnel have its way with air. If anyone later asked him for proof something screens could play or forms could capture, he would have shrugged and offered what the ridge offered in exchange for attention. Big rooms under mountains have rules. They are not there to scare people. They are there to move air and to remind anyone inside that skill is a kind of kindness you offer to machines and to one another. Sometimes a place remembers the tone of a person who used to care for it and lets that tone ride the wires now and then when the weather presses a little static into the world. When you hear it, you do as asked. You keep the center, you stay off the brake when the fans take their breath, and you respect the number that feels human for a reason. The exit arrives like the end of a song that you don't clap for because clapping would be too loud. and the night beyond remains wide and ready for the wood. Next miles in front of you. Story number 7. Vera preferred routes that wound between mountains, where valleys gathered the night and held it steady. She was hauling chilled produce to a cluster of small groceries, patient work that liked the dark. The run took her across a patch of map few people think about until their phones go quiet, a wide, green bowl tucked into the Appalachians where the hills sit like old shoulders, and the sky seems closer than usual. Her dispatcher called it the long way, but Vera didn't mind. The long way left room for breathing. A little before midnight, the signs began to change their tone. They had the same fonts and bolts as anywhere, the same reflective sheen, but the words were different. Radio quiet zone ahead, said a whiteboard with plain black letters. No unnecessary transmissions. The next one leaned into it. Cell service limited. Reduce electronics. The last carried a careful sentence that made her smile. Welcome. Please help us listen. The temperature in the cab was a clean cool from the reefer behind her. She liked the faint, even drum of it, evidence of a machine doing its job without needing to be watched. Her CB sat on its shelf, lighted digits dimmed as habit. The little hotspot she kept for maps when signal got patchy blinked patiently. She reached and clicked it off. There are places where quiet is more than polite. It's the whole point. The road narrowed into a 2-lane that traced the slope of a valley, as if it had been poured there while someone hummed. White oaks and tulip poplars leaned inward, their leaves making a soft conversation that carried down to the pavement. On the ridgeline above, alternating red points blinked slow and patient markers on towers, or on something that wanted to be seen by the night. Far ahead, a shape rose that wasn't a hill, wasn't a barn, wasn't anything a person sees every day. It was a dish, a massive white bowl tilted toward the universe, like a question asked without words. Vera had known, as an idea, about the observatory here. She'd seen it once from a distance at noon, all white in geometry. At night it looked like a giant listening, an ear made of angles. A small part of her urged a photograph. The rest of her respected the sign and kept devices asleep. Some things ask for attention, and also for restraint. The first gentle strangeness arrived not as a sight, but as a sensation in the air, a sense that the cabin had been wrapped in a lighter cloth. Noise peeled away. The diesel's murmur softened without getting quieter. The hum of the reefer remained exactly itself. Somewhere, the sound of the world's busy chatter had stepped aside. The CB gave a single, delicate hiss. A soft hiss answered it from where? She couldn't say. A low, old-fashioned tone rose in the dash, like 2 wires greeting each other, then settled. Her route skirted the edge of the listen zone. The valley narrowed where a creek had done good work over long years, and the road settled in beside it for a mile as if to share a story. Turnouts appeared for no reason except courtesy. Places to let faster vehicles pass, places for trucks to breathe. Vera kept a speed that would not stir the stones. Her headlights, set low, made honest work of the way ahead. The CB picked up a voice that didn't belong to 19. It arrived the way rain arrives on a tin roof, soft at first, then present without apology. Spectrum Patrol, the voice said, calm and practical. Sweep 2 at mile 8. Unidentified oscillation near Kiln Hollow. Amplitude low. Source intermittent. If you're out, keep it dark and keep it kind. It wasn't an order, more like a neighbor's request spoken through an old intercom. She had heard of Spectrum Patrols, folks whose job is to walk the valley with little antennas and friendly patience, finding leaky microwaves and misbehaving fences. The voice had the dryness of someone used to night and comfortable in it. Vera did not touch her mic. She had nothing to add and nothing to ask that wouldn't sound like making herself the center of someone else's work. She rolled on. To her right, the creek showed itself in glints and suggestions, a run of water that chose its sounds carefully. Fireflies kept their own counsel in the brush, small beings that don't care if people are paying attention as long as the air is good. In the distance, the white bowl turned a degree, then another. Moving that much steel looked slow, respectful, like carrying water in a full cup. At a lay-by, an old wooden sign with hand-painted letters outlived the posts holding it. Check your devices, it said, in smaller script. It's not a law. It's a favor. Someone had added a smiley face with a crooked line for a mouth. the kind a child draws when they're learning circles. Vera clicked her cab light on, not to read anything, just to make her fingers sure about the switches they were about to touch. She slid the phone into airplane mode, though it had already given up bars a mile back. She made sure the dashcam's Wi-Fi was asleep. She glanced at the reefer control panel. Solid green. Content. The little hotspot was off. It was a short checklist and easy to enjoy. The air changed again. Not colder, not warmer. Just a sense of pressure easing from her ears, the way a person swallows after a hill and everything clears. The CB whispered with a voice that sounded like it belonged to another decade. Calling station green, it said. Monitoring. All is well. The call letters were a string of consonants and numbers she didn't know how to spell in her head. No one answered like in movies. The sound simply passed through, made a small place for itself, and moved on. At the far end of a straight stretch, a small white pickup eased out of a gravel drive and paused at the edge. It wore no flashy lights, only a pair of amber flashers low at the rear that blinked with the patient rhythm of something official but not in a hurry. A little mast rose from its bed with a loop antenna the size of a dinner plate. The driver and outline more than a person lifted a hand in the old neighbor way. Vera lifted hers. The pickup waited until she was past, then turned the other direction and vanished quietly into a curtain of trees. She crossed a bridge before town Ironsides painted the color of robin's eggs in a better year, rust working politely from the edges in this one. A sign posted just before it repeated the request, with a specificity that made her smile again. Please, no Bluetooth. Thank you. The bridge carried her with a neat, compact sound that metal makes when it is pleased to be sturdy. The village lights that lived within the valley had learned not to shout. Porch lamps wore shades. Windows glowed like sleeping eyes. At the corner where the general store had been a gas station and then something else, and then a store again, a small bulletin board held notices under plastic sleeves. Vera didn't stop. She read the world the way drivers do, in passing. A bake sale for the fire hall, a handwritten ad for a wood stove, a photo of a dog who had learned invisibility. Past the village, road returned to 2 lanes knotted lightly to the land. The dish shone pale to the right, tucked into its clearing. Vera saw another, smaller dish slightly off-axis, as if it had been built first and refused retirement. Around their bases, the grass lay cut to a short, fawn-colored nap that told of regular mowing. Against the far tree line, the towers with their red markers kept blinking, slow and unafraid. Her CB, behaving more like a library than a bandstand, let one more voice walk in. This one was a woman's, lighter but with the same practical seam. Patrol 2 to base, she said, picking up a drift from a reefer unit crossing Maple Run. Not harmful, just chatty. If you're out there, driver, thank you for the quiet. Keep her for another mile and you'll be out of the bowl. It took Vera a breath to realize the remark had bent itself gently toward her, without calling her by anything at all. Reefers have boards, and boards have chips, and chips talk to each other like birds. She knew that. It pleased her somehow to be seen for running clean. She glanced in her mirror at the white box behind her, and felt the same affection a person feels for a machine that earns it. You're doing fine, she said aloud, not to the radio, not to anyone really, but to the night. The air gathered itself briefly into a mood. The creek tucked closer. Fog lived low over it, the kind that moves like breath on glass. The center line flashed yellow, where the paint was fresher, and then calmed again to an older tone. Somewhere, an owl considered music, and then chose to wait. Vera let a little more patience into her foot. The reefer hummed. The valley listened. And because the night was in that mood where memory likes to visit, it did. In the speaker, with a tiny bed of static-like paper being folded and unfolded, an older voice arrived. It carried the grain of film audio, the way someone sounds when a tape has been played many times in rooms with wooden chairs. Green Bank Control, it said. Field check. Sweep complete. Keep it quiet for the night. Let's listen. The words had that particular weight the older drivers had when they kept the CB polite, by tone alone. Vera imagined a room with dim lamps and dials, a person with a pencil and a thermos, and a habit of reminding machines that people could be kind if asked the right way. The sign that marked the edge of the zone appeared so simply, she would have missed it if she'd been any less herself. "Thank you for your quiet," it read. The next sign was the kind the rest of the map knows well. Cell service ahead. The very first bar climbed onto her phone with a bashful speed, then another, a return of the kinds of noise most people miss when it's gone and don't love when it's back. She didn't reach for anything. She kept the small candle of quiet a little longer, just past the line where obligation stopped and courtesy didn't have to. The road widened. The trees gathered themselves into a more common shape. Somewhere behind her, the dish turned and continued its work, listening for a kind of whisper that only exists when everyone nearby agrees not to talk for a while. A rest area eased up on the right not long after, a tidy run of spaces under lamps that produced a soft, yellow idea of day. A few cars with license plates from states that take different weather slept there. A single, medium-duty wrecker idled without sounding like it was. Vera pulled in, set the brake, and let the truck finish a little conversation with itself as temperatures settled. She stepped down, stretched with the kind of care that traveling trains into bodies, and walked toward the building. On the wall near the vending machines hung a framed photo of the big dish. Not white in this photo, but a gentle gray against a winter sky, all its bolts and lattice proud. A caption in a measured font noted the year a major upgrade had been completed, and the number of receivers installed, numbers that would thrill a certain kind of brain. Handwritten under the frame, tucked beneath the glass, someone had slid a strip of paper. "Quiet keeps us safe. Thank you, travelers." There was no signature, only small stars drawn in blue ink along the bottom edge. A man in a maintenance cap filled a bucket at the janitor's sink. He noticed her reading and tilted his head. "Pretty up there at night," he said. "Looks like it's thinking." "Feels that way," Vera answered. "They've got a couple old hands whose voices will ride your radio when the skip gets funny," he offered, like sharing a recipe. "Scared me the first time I heard it. Telling folks to keep it calm, watch what's chirping, mind the bowl. Not orders. More like how my grandmother would talk to people in her kitchen." He smiled without showing teeth. "Doesn't do any harm. Maybe does some good. I switched off the noisy stuff," she said. He nodded, pleased without making a fuss about it. "Much obliged." She bought a coffee that had the good fortune to have been brewed this hour, not some other one. The cup warmed her hands in a way the night let her keep. She sat on a bench for a minute and watched moths examine the lamp lens, then decide they had better work to do. A freight train, 3 ridges away, spoke once, and then kept its own counsel. The stars, allowed back into their positions by the local arrangement, looked like they might be willing to teach someone geometry. Back on the highway, signal strength returned with a little more swagger. The dispatch tablet collected itself and announced a delivery window in a polite rectangle. Her pocket buzzed with messages that could wait. She pressed the CB's volume up a notch and let the usual theater of late night find its place. A driver asked about tire chains in a state that didn't need them this month. Someone in a van rolled into a joke and out the other side without harm. The valley fell behind like a paragraph concluded without rushing. The memory of the voice, the one that thanked silence, stayed with her a while. She kept the reefer's set point even, and made small corrections, and ignored the itch to share what she'd just passed through. Not everything benefits from becoming content for someone else. Some things work better when people simply agree to do them. 2 days later, eastbound this time and earlier by an hour, she took the same road. Habit brought her hand to the hotspot switch before the sign asked. She slowed by 1 mile per hour from what had felt right before, and found that this felt even more right. Somewhere near the bridge, the CB let through the faintest return, a breath that sounded like the beginning of a word. "Listening," said the voice, or maybe her memory said it for it. The dish turned. The towers blinked in no hurry. She kept the truck between the lines alive, deliberate, kind. If anyone asked her down the line how it had been, she would likely describe it the way someone describes a library at night with the windows open. Air moves. People breathe. Machines hum. And somewhere in that arrangement, a good thing can happen if everyone agrees to be a little gentler with their noise. The road doesn't punish. It invites. The valley doesn't haunt. It reminds. We come through. We loosen our grip on our own volume. We mind our traveling. And something much larger leans an ear toward the dark. And here's what it's there to hear. Story number 8. He ran the high road, the maps printed lightly. The northern 2-lane that traveled across muskeg and fir and vanished snow fences. His name was Grady, the sort of driver who favored long quiets, who kept mittens on the passenger seat even in July because memory likes to be ready. He was carrying shelf milk and box staples to communities that breathed with river schedules and daylight that came late or not at all, depending on the month. Night there was like velvet pinned with cold stars, and the line of asphalt felt stitched across a field of black glass. The truck loved the cold in its own way. Engines appreciate dense air that gives up its oxygen without argument. The reefer murmured its steady, small lullaby. His dash shone in modest whites and blues, brightness turned down so the world outside would still matter. Ahead, markers stood taller than usual, willow wands and fiberglass rods fixed in the shoulder, the kind that tell plows where the road goes when the road tries to pretend it's not there. The wind had sat down for the night. The snow, where there was any, lay thin and old, scraped to low drifts that made long shadows under stars. Wayfinding in that country is its own sport. Signs practice understatement. Services 138 miles. One said, brave and unapologetic. Winter maintenance ends, said another, as if calm were a thing you could misplace. A short, fixed sign with a reflective triangle warned about a frozen creek that sometimes enjoyed trying to be on top of the road instead of under it. Grady went light on the throttle there and listened to the texture change like stepping onto a polished hallway. Around 1 in the morning, the sky offered a thought. A pale green smear low in the north, not bright, just there. He had seen the aurora in performances that stole words, and in shy appearances like this one. Tonight it gathered itself into sheets that folded and refolded, as if someone was shaking out bedding. Little beads of stars glowed through it. The road received this without comment. The reflectors blinked back to their business. He had been warned about a different kind of light up here, not from sky but from air. Wait for a really cold, really still night. A fuel station owner had told him while counting change with blue fingers. You get diamond dust, tiny ice in the air you can't see until it catches light. Then pillars rise up like city streets above the smallest lamp. It'll look like a town is ahead where there isn't any town. Pretty. It'll try to turn your wheel for you if you let it. Grady had stored that with the other briefings that came with routes. A list of small kindnesses the land expects from a person before it returns any. Tonight, the temperature had crept down to the sort of number calculators display with a minus in front. The air felt clean enough to cut and stack. A faint cloud of his breath from a crack in the window made the cab smell like wool and winter. The first pillar came off a rig half a mile ahead. Not above it, but above the spot where its trailer marker lights threw a few red points into the cold. Vertical lines lifted high, faint at first, then clearer, like strings hung from a ceiling. When the rig took a distant bend and the lights disappeared, the pillar didn't, not immediately. It hung there a few breaths longer, and then released the air back to itself. More arrived, columns rising above scattered farmyards, where a single yard light burned like stubborn honey in a jar. The pillars were not solid. They had the softness of breath on glass, the grandeur of choir chords held without effort. Alone on a straight stretch, lights deep ahead seemed to gather in a neat row, and the pillar effect embroidered it until the row looked like the ramparts of a city. Grady watched the edges, not the center. He trusted the wands with their reflective tape more than anything that tried to pretend a skyline exists where only trees stand. He made small decisions with the wheel that looked like not doing anything. Down in a shallow bog, the road crossed on a low fill. Willow branches of no particular ownership arched bare and delicate over black water. The aurora moved like it remembered a dance from a long time ago. The truck hummed. The CB had been quiet enough to forget. He kept it on low because habit had value, even when habit had nothing to do. At the edge of town and in every book he'd ever read about this place, people talked about strange radio at these latitudes. Not words, but sounds that traveled through long wire fences and up telephone poles and came back as whistles, the music of charges sliding in the upper air. He kept an ear for it, and heard only the engine becoming warm at the same pace as the road. Past a stand of birch skeletons, the pillars came in full, rising in grills and gates wherever a bulb had been left on. Even his own marker lights made faint white ghost pillars ahead, reflections reaching up from their glow across the hood. He tested the high beams, and then turned them back because long lights erase detail in cold air. They wash out what you need to see. Low beams held edges. That was what mattered. A thin white sign appeared where he didn't expect one. Remote weather station. 2 miles, it said. and then below in smaller letters, "Slow when flags vertical." He almost laughed because the night kept being practical, even when it was being strange. He watched for flags. The station arrived as a little fenced rectangle with a small mast and a light the color of onion skin. 2 pennants hung flat against their poles, as if made of metal. All quiet then. He moved on. He knew this stretch had a long causeway over what maps called a lake and locals called simply open water, though in winter it slept under a roof of old ice. Light pillars along the far shore made it look like a fairground stood there, a line of thin lanterns raised to great height. In summer, the place held families and boats, and the voices of dogs too delighted to care what humans thought. Tonight it held his truck quietly, miles alone that he respected. The pencil-straight run over the ice felt like handling a delicate instrument. He kept to the center, the tires exactly between the seams in the planks that had once been laid to teach plowblades where to ride. The pillars above the shore did that stretchy trick again, making the far bank appear closer than math would allow. The wands in the shoulder reminded him not to let eyes become too clever. At the midpoint, where a small pull-out for stranded vehicles had been plowed, just a shelf held up by snow and plan and habit, a shape Saturday. He saw it a quarter-mile out. A compact plow, orange with a layer of fuzz the color of aluminum, the look that happens when frost realizes it has time to be thorough. Its amber beacon was off. In the cab, a figure leaned, maybe asleep, maybe listening. Grady slowed a little, not to gawk, not to change the rig's posture. Just the courtesy speed you adopt when another vehicle holds the road with you. As he drew alongside, the plow's driver lifted a gloved hand without opening the window and tapped 2 fingers twice against the glass. A gesture that looked like someone counting nothing. Grady nodded. The CB pushed a small sound across the carpet of noise, a phrase so faint it could have been his own thought given a small voice. "Hold 43, it said. It didn't sound like instruction. It sounded like good news, shared plainly. 43, not 42, not 45. He had not been looking at the speed, he had been listening to the feel. When he glanced, the needle kissed the exact that had been offered. He kept it there, not to honor a disembodied thing, but because the truck felt suddenly perfectly in the groove of the road, as if a rail had been laid underneath for just such a pace. He breathed, and let the breath be the length of the distance between the next 2 wands. At the far side of the lake, a low road spurred right toward a cluster of dark shapes that had been a radar station long ago. Redomes like sleeping moons, chain-link fences that never truly fell to rust, because the wind kept the world honest. The light pillars above it were the grandest, tall, bright, almost theatrical. The spur looked plowed for a short stretch, a clean suggestion. Grady had been warned about that too. They keep the first 100 yards open so service can get in if they need, a man at a tire shop had said while chalking numbers on sidewalls. Looks like a promise, isn't? His GPS showed nothing useful there. Just the standard gray path of a road that existed and didn't do him any favors. His log asked nothing of him in that direction. The wands on the main route kept their quiet drumbeat along the edge. He let the spur pass. As he did, the aurora brightened on an offbeat and then softened, like music coming to the end of a phrase without a period. Past the lake, the land returned to muskeg and low rise. Black spruce made neat lines, the same story repeated in 1,000 slender voices. The pillars moved away as the lights did, and he found he didn't miss them. He preferred edges and paint and things he could feel through his palms. The CB decided to offer another sound. It wasn't a voice this time, but a song a wire makes when the air asks it politely. A whistle slid downward, not electronic, more like the noise a finger makes when you run it lightly around the rim of a glass and then lift off. It arrived, fell, and went. Then another, a little higher. Ionized air and the Earth's big magnetism doing what they do, they above the heads of people who sometimes remember to look up. On the margins of that, as if someone had turned a page and written something practical in the margins just in case, the faintest thing like Morse tapped. Not fast, not urgent. A slow tap-tap, a long dash, a pause that was neither long nor short. He had no telegraph. He had memory of a grandfather tapping a side of a coffee cup with a spoon like he was trying to tell someone in another room the weather. The taps didn't spell anything he knew, unless the letters were R and A or E, or simply the shape of the night signing itself to anyone who was polite enough not to talk over it. A low signboard announced the road's only real intersection for a long while. North Access Road, it said, smaller letters, saying things about seasonal closure. The pillar above that sign formed, held, then broke into faint little beads where the diamond dust gave up. A mailbox leaned on a post nearby, with a family name painted on it by a hand that cared. The name told him something about where he was and also nothing at all. He rolled through, the truck sending a small hush over packed snow that had learned to be road. The land rose to a ridge nobody would call a mountain. Wind fences, built from boards with careful spacing, grew out of the ditch like music staffs. Tonight, with air calm, they did nothing but hold shadows. On other nights, they sang aeolian tones that made long vowels out of 1,000 slats. As he crested, the aurora shifted unexpectedly into a curtain right above, light hanging down like drapery he could almost touch. It moved in small ripples. He felt it more than saw it in awareness, like a hand passing above your skin without contact. The CB coughed and offered the single word a human mouth would say in that situation, and it sounded like laughter that wasn't laughter. There are stretches in any long run where time spools out and then collects itself again like measuring tape. The miles found their steady clatter and laid it at his feet. The truck settled so deeply into its purpose that he felt himself become a bystander to a fine machine doing what it loved in a world that decided to approve. He passed a sign for a pullout, long drifted in. On the very small remaining patch of plowed shoulder at its lip, someone had placed a little wooden A-frame with reflective tape zigzagged across it, as if it had been decorated by a cheerful child. On its crossbar, painted long ago, and then painted over, and then showing through again, letters surfaced in the beam. Keep to your road. He did, and because he kept to his road, the light pillars continued to be nothing more than elegant lies told by cold to those who wished for cities where there were none. The aurora continued to move like water silked over polished stone. The CB continued to collect small exhalations of other trucks far away, here and gone, voices reduced to breath by distance and weather, and the universe doing its huge algebra above their heads. Near dawn, when the black reluctantly accepted blue in the corners, the pillars faded, as if embarrassed to be seen. The aurora dimmed to a memory. The temperature learned warmer numbers, without enthusiasm. Trees showed themselves in the ordinary way, nothing mystical about them but the fact that they were alive. He fell in behind an old school bus used as a work shuttle, the paint scoured by cold years to a color that had probably had a proper noun once. Its tailpipe swirled a clean, small fog. Above its lights, for a flicker and no more, a faint vertical line lifted, thought better of it, and lay down. The services sign's brave number had counted itself down without him needing to check. A cluster of low buildings with their own plumes of steam sat cautious against a bluff. At the edge of the lot, a seesaw welded out of steel pipe waited for a season different from this one. The cafe's door was propped open with a cinder block, because hinges tend to complain in cold, and door closers like to race in it. He parked in a line that would be easy for the next person, set the brake with the quiet click the truck preferred, and sat for a small time listening to warmth find every corner. Inside, coffee did what coffee does when brewed in a place where it matters. On a bulletin board above a table, where mittens and a single college brochure lay, a photograph was pinned with clear tape. It showed the lake causeway at night, pillars burning above it, as if the sky had built scaffolding. In the lower corner, someone had written in marker, "Not a city." The letters lacked enough ink for the last word to be bold. The waitress saw him looking and smiled with the ease of someone who knows how often such things need saying. "Pretty trick," she said. "We lost 2 tourists to it a few winters back." She raised her hands quick. Lost as in lost their way, not. She shook her head. They followed the lights toward the old station road and had to camp in their car until morning. Nothing bad. Just cold. And a story. He nodded, warmed by the thought of a night that asked for humility and got it. The waitress poured, and then tapped her nail on the pot once. A little tick that sounded almost exactly like the tap-tap he had heard from the radio or the sky. She didn't notice. It was probably just a habit. On the return trip days later, the air had softened to the point where pillars were a rumor, and the aurora stayed behind a low bank of cloud, like a quiet friend who didn't need to impress. He still kept his hands steady near the lake. He still loved the neat soldier line of wands and respected their quiet command. Another plow had taken the shelter at midpoint, a different shape, but the same patience. Its driver lifted a hand, and Grady lifted his, with recognition that had nothing to do with faces and everything to do with a shared road and a shared set of gentle rules. If asked what the North had given him beyond miles and the comfort of work done well, he would have said it offered a lesson in not chasing the wrong light. The world can make elegant illusions out of physics and cold, and a single bulb left on over a tractor shed. It can stack those illusions into pillars as high as a cathedral. They are beautiful. They are not your path. Your path is the paint and the posts and the metal stakes hammered in by someone with a thermos and a job in their hands, and sometimes a soft word over a radio that sounds like your own memory reminding you of a speed that fits the night exactly. He kept that speed when he could. He held his lane as if it were a promise, and the miles behind him lined up like the neat rows a good plowman leaves in a field you will never see under snow. And now the engines fade, and the highway falls silent once more. These 8 stories drift away like distant echoes, leaving only the hum of the night and the quiet of the open road behind. Out here, the dark never ends. It only waits for another traveler to listen. Thank you for staying until the end. If you're new, subscribe to our channel so you never miss what waits beyond the headlights. And like our video, your like motivates us to keep bringing you more nights on the road. Now, let the silence settle in, breathe slow, and drift into sleep. Good night.